Hello and welcome. My name is Apostle Alauddin or Apostle Aladdin, and today I'll be joined by a guest who you've seen on the channel before. Obviously, the title is kind of a giveaway, and she is. I was going to say she's back by popular demand, which she kind of is. A lot of people said they wanted to hear her talk again, but that's not why she's back. I didn't really ask her to come back because she has fans. She talked to me off stream and she expressed how she would like to continue the conversation. I'll let her do the talking about what are the things that she wants to discuss today. I will have some questions for her, but before we begin, I wanted to give a brief kind of disclaimer. We're going to talk about the purpose of this talk, me and her, so I'm not going to give that away right now. But try to focus on that purpose because sometimes I see a lot of commenters who seem to miss the mark. They don't understand why we're having this conversation. So try to keep your comments in that context. And I will have questions for Rachel, and I'm going to have follow-up questions as I always do. But the point is not to grill her in this conversation about everything in Islam, and that's not usually the approach I take when I'm talking to Muslims, unless someone's really asserting a bad belief or behavior. So then I will push back on that as well. So try to look at that conversation from that point of view. And Rachel's not here to argue for her position or Islam or Quranism or anything like that. And I'm not here to argue against those things. We're just trying to understand how we both think. So without further ado, I'm adding Rachel now. Hi, Rachel. How's it going?
Hey, how's it going? I'm good. How are you?
Not too bad. Um, uh, I mean, this is kind of a fake greeting because we've been talking for 5 minutes now or 10
Yeah,
minutes.
this
Uh,
is for the fans.
yeah.
Hey, everybody.
Yeah, we had a back and forth about things that have nothing to do with today's topics.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so that was kind of an icebreaker.
hmm
So you said you had a few things on your mind that you wanted to mention first, so I'll let you go ahead and do that.
Yeah, so mine is also kind of my own personal disclaimer. This is a prepared statement, as they say in Hollywood. So, just for everybody who's listening, what we are about to discuss is the collection of my lived experiences and study. So, it's highly personal, but I'm choosing to make it public primarily for the benefit of those who may silently need support in a similar situation. It's still very new, and I know a lot of people are going to have some strong feelings. So for any people who I've already seen in the comments from before, the militant ex-Muslims who will celebrate, I have more disappointment and sadness right now than anger or relief because I've recently lost a part of my community and my identity. For people on the other side, the more conservative or militant Muslims who will condemn me or our host, I sought him out. He's politely and thoughtfully answered my questions based on his own views, but never pushed anything on me or tried to convince me of anything. And in the end, the evidence spoke for itself. And this wasn't a choice that I wanted to make, but more one I felt that I had to make. For everybody in the comments, please try to focus on inquiry and dialogue rather than attacking or fighting us or each other, because despite our differences, we're all deserving of dignity and respect in the end. You ready? You ready for the big reveal?
Oh, go for it.
So many of you saw this coming and have already predicted this in the comments, but 6.5 years after converting, I've decided to leave Islam. When I told my atheist mother about this a couple weeks back, she said, "I can't believe it took you this long." And I know what she meant, but that still hurt to hear. And so again, please be kind to me, be kind to our host, and to each other in the comments. So with all that in mind, what do you want to discuss?
So first of all, I honestly had no idea that you were gonna come out and say that.
Well,
Um,
it's gonna direct things, man.
No, seriously, like I did not know that you had already had that conclusion. But we did
I,
talk off camera, but
yeah,
I made it a point not to ask or even, imply, so when are you leaving or are you leaving, right?
yeah.
Because that was never the purpose of our first talk or even this talk.
hmm
Um, and people might think that the purpose of my channel is to deconvert as many people as I can or
No.
disprove Islam in some ways.
hmm
um, I like that's a tangent, but I don't disprove Islam because I don't need to. Like, there's the burden of proof. I don't need to
hmm
disprove something that has been proven.
Yeah.
And when I say something that's a criticism of Islam, or even something that doesn't qualify as disproving or an argument, as they put it,
Hmm.
I don't have to qualify as everything as a debate argument kind of thing. It could just be, hey, my thoughts are this is silly or
Yeah.
this is good and so on. And I like that you used the term militant ex-Muslims. I did not think of that before.
Man, but I think you know what I'm talking about. Some
Yeah, no,
people
no,
are
I'm not picking on
way
that.
over
Actually,
on
I'm
one
gonna
side.
use that
Yeah.
term myself.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. And someone's asking, did she leave? I didn't hear that right. Yes.
You did hear that right. Oh, and
Yeah.
all in caps too. Yes, 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 I did.
Yeah, and try not to like be people in the comments. Try not to be smug about it. Even if you called it earlier or something like that, it's not always the outcome that's going to happen, and also it's no time to like it's nothing to celebrate per se. I would celebrate you. Like the conversation that we had was celebration and a cause for celebration enough for me because I
Mhm,
can see you actually thinking about the questions that I was asking, and
mhm,
whether you're going to conclude at the end that that means Islam is likely not true or not. At least you were, isolating that one part and making sure you deal with that kind of belief or
mhm.
belief that's you're forced to have if you're part of this group. You know what I mean? So yeah, before we get into some of the topics that we want to talk about today, I had some questions for you.
Yeah.
So
How many of them did I just torpedo, by the way?
no, none so far. I don't
Okay,
think
great.
so.
Okay, cool.
Um, well, it's kind of expanding on. You said you sought me out, and I remember in the previous stream you were in the waiting room of this live stream. Like I was having a
Hmm.
live stream with anyone who would want to call in.
Yep.
And you waited for a long time, so thanks for that. And you
Yeah.
said you were enjoying like watching the conversation.
Hmm.
Was that the first time that you came across my channel and my content in general?
Um, it it was a couple days prior over on your TikTok channel, and then I'd linked to the YouTube. I don't remember exactly the algorithm that led me there, but I saw the announcement or the reminder about that other live stream, the call in. And so I set the reminder. I said, "Oh, this will be interesting to listen to, and let's just see how it goes." And when I listened for a little bit, and I heard kind of the way you direct the conversation, and like you said, don't try to convince anybody, but just have a dialogue. I thought this is an interesting format, and like I wonder what I might talk about, and so I, put in the link.
Okay, that's very interesting. Uh,
Yeah.
I don't always think about how people might migrate from one platform to another,
Hmm.
and that can be a problem because the way that I would come off in 30 seconds on TikTok is different than if you had a conversation with me.
Hmm.
So I've kind of I'm less active on TikTok,
Hmm.
partly by choice and partly because I keep getting suspended without posting anything on TikTok.
Oh, really? I
Um,
wonder why.
yeah, people really don't like some of the things that I say, and not even the offensive things, because if it is even like something bigoted that I said, the
Hmm.
video will absolutely be taken down. But lately, nothing has been taken down, and I keep getting suspended anyway. So I think it's
Yeah.
just mass reporting. But anyway, so, did you watch any of my videos before the live stream, or was that the first exposure? I mean, on YouTube.
Let me think. My memory is really awful, and this was not something I knew you would ask me, so I didn't really think about it in advance. So don't know, but at some point I watched a couple others, at least in part, and I watched like a Q&A that you did with another creator. I can't remember what the guy's name was. He's a beardy guy. Um,
Oh, Abdullah Samir, probably.
that's it.
Hmm.
And yeah, he was equally very chill and, you know, in my opinion, like middle path. Like let's talk, but let's not try to get too crazy on either side.
Fair enough. Okay, well, the last question here is, what do you hope we get out of this conversation? What do you hope you get out of this conversation today?
Well, I think life's a journey, and go along for the ride. The best thing to do is a road trip because there's all those weird roadside attractions like world's largest ball of string or whatever. So maybe we'll find something interesting today.
Sounds good. Someone's saying in the previous stream, she says she's a Quranist. Yeah, and don't skip ahead, okay? We
Yeah.
will talk about that.
Well, somebody else in the previous comments said, I know what the next step's going to be. This is what everybody does. And I was like, oh, no, never. And then all of a sudden,
Yeah.
surprise.
Doesn't mean that they're always going to be right about that kind
No,
of
of course not.
prediction, but
Yeah.
and someone's saying the conversation's over, she left. No, absolutely not, because the
Yeah.
point
See
wasn't
you
just
later,
like,
guys.
yeah, okay. we won one. All right, next, I suppose.
10 points for Gryffindor.
Yeah, arbitrary, just like add a million points for this one. Okay, so you wanted to talk about how it started for you. So why don't you go ahead?
So, as I said, life's a journey. I've been in a constant state of researching and learning, not just about this, but in life in general, because there's so much to know and life is so interesting. Um, So it's also one of the things that attracted me to Islam in the first place. And at the time of the last live stream, I was dissatisfied with the Ummah and not able to reconcile my social beliefs with what I'd been told were like the Islamic stances on certain things, which had led me to Quranism, as that other commenter mentioned. But on further digging, I found more and more issues and had a lot more questions than answers at that point. In addition, I felt I was at an almost like paranoid level of distrust of the resources that were available to me, especially online, because every time I tried to find answers, I would find an agenda or fallacies underlying the information, or I would find that where one piece of information on a certain source was comforting, another from the same source was highly disturbing. So for the majority of the questions in my mind, I was finding either no clear answers or something that just didn't satisfy me. There were a few turning points, I guess, where I was really refocusing my mentality. One of them was, and this doesn't mean these people don't exist, but I had never ever met a practicing Muslim man who didn't have anti-LGBT views. In some cases, it's more subtle, but it's definitely still there. Also, I had gone to a Friday service a few weeks prior where I actually walked out in the first 5, 10 minutes because of the blatant bigotry and lack of pushback from anybody there. There was heavy homophobia, transphobia, some light racism, and just a sprinkling of anti Semitism for panache. Um, didn't really care for that. Also, I was presented with the concept of Islam having kind of a clouded message or the imperfection of a message, and by extension, the messenger and the message writer, which kind of blew my mind. And I had been admittedly excusing or ignoring or minimizing on a case by case basis certain issues that I had thought of and kind of pushing them to the back of my mind. But everything was brought forward all at once with this revelation, I would say. And the collective evidence was kind of overwhelming, and I really had to dig deep and think. And then following that, about a week later, I had a 45-minute video call with an imam who's local, who I had previously witnessed expressing compassion and acceptance for members of the LGBT community publicly during an interfaith dialogue session that I was helping with. But in this call, when I pressed him more for his own personal view beyond the sugar-coated public version, it only sent me further down the hole. It was full of excuses and minimizations and like hate the sin, not the sinner rhetoric. And I think the two sentences that stuck out were, we don't have the definite answers. We just have to trust. And I said, this is what I always heard growing up, but I'm not taking it. And also, it would cause an imbalance in normal society. Don't
Mm.
really care for that language either. Yeah.
I do have questions about your LGBT stance,
Hmm.
and yeah, I'll get to that in a second.
Sure.
First, I want to take a question from Hasan Alwan. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him.
Oh, I saw him in the comments before. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Oh, okay.
he makes YouTube videos about similar topics, and
Hmm.
his style is very unique in many ways.
Okay.
If you haven't seen his videos, I would recommend you watch his over mine, to be honest. But
Okay.
if you could do both, go for it.
Hmm.
Yeah. So Hassan Allah is saying, do you still believe in God? If you do, how would you define this God? Kind of skipping
I
ahead, Mr. Hassan, but we'll talk about it.
Yeah. Do you want to go for that one right now? Because I have actually thought about that a good deal.
Okay, let's first get the LGBT issue out of the way.
Sure. Okay.
So, the reason I want you to expand on that a little bit is because I'm thinking about it as a Muslim. I would watch you say this and I'd be like, of course she left because she supports gay people, and it's a bad thing, right? Without even thinking further, because the default is that is some kind of moral corruption, and
Mhm.
you support this. And do you like, how was that always the default in your mind, that you think, like, I don't even like the word support LGBT people, because you don't, like, it's not really supporting someone to just say, yeah, you're free to marry other people like you. Like, it's not really something that you need to have a say in, right? Or was
Yeah.
it to you a stance that you had to take? You know what I mean?
I have a lot of different ways to answer that. And so if I start to go in a direction that's not really what you're asking, just interrupt me, please, because otherwise
Okay.
I'll go really far down. But I think freedom and rights is something that I believe in many cases for many groups of people. And the LGBT community is one of them. It's something that's a very present social issue these days. And there's all sorts of troublesome history like conversion camps, pray the gay away, shock therapy, all kinds of stuff that, should not have been happening. But these days, science has definitively told us that it's not a choice, it's not a preference, it's something that's innate from birth. Even during the conversation with this imam, he acknowledged that as well. Um, and why should somebody be punished for that? Another Muslim friend of mine who I was discussing this decision with kind of made the analogy of somebody who's born poor but then grows up to be rich. And I said, that's not a fair analogy because that is something you can change. This is more like being born, for example, a person of color in a predominantly white area. You can't change that. And it's something that's going to affect your life forever and that you will be discriminated against in some cases because of. That's a more apt thing. And I said to this friend of mine, you are an immigrant, you are a person of color, you are a Muslim in America. Like, do you see how this would be a more accurate comparison? Because two of those three things you can't change, and I'm sure you've experienced discrimination because of them. And he's
Now
a
that I
pretty
think about
open-minded
this,
guy. Hmm.
how do you feel about this analogy? So you mentioned people of color in a predominantly white area.
Yeah.
Let's say the percentages are the same as the number of gay people in a straight area, which every area is basically a straight area.
Okay.
Um,
I don't have the data, but sure, let's
yeah,
pretend.
let's just presume that in a
Hmm.
specific situation.
Hmm.
I think like their stance is you shouldn't, or gay people shouldn't get married, or maybe they just like they're not going to interfere, but they shouldn't, morally they shouldn't be doing that.
Hmm.
It's as if someone said, people of color and white people should not get married, right? It's moral
That used to
corruption
be
or
the law
whatever.
in the US. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's
Until
very
like the
similar.
50s or something. Yeah.
Like, don't you think it's like you mentioned how you can't change your color basically, so
Hmm.
you can't change your sexuality either. Like, do you see that
Yeah.
as analogous, these two?
Yeah, that's why I presented that as my
Mhm.
counter to what my friend said. I said, this is, I think, a much more apt comparison because it's something that equally affects people even today, despite the gains that have been made. And I think we're going to see similar trends with this particular issue, the LGBT issue. It's going to take a lot of time and there'll be growing support, but there'll also be growing backlash. And, we need to figure out how to reconcile it and be a bit more forward minded and quit quit restricting people's freedoms because of our own beliefs. Marry who you want to marry as long as everything's adult and consensual. And you know, what's the big deal? Nobody's forcing you to have a gay marriage. Like, this is not going to
Yeah.
affect you. It doesn't cheapen or lessen what you have, which is what some people feel. I just don't get it. I don't know.
Well, I think that's the Christian narrative. It's kind of the sanctity of marriage and this and that. I
Yeah.
think in the Muslim sphere, it's not as much that. It's just, God said it's bad and it is very gross and bad, and that's why. Before we get to Hasan Allan's question, I
Hmm.
want to address this point and get your thoughts on it. So, Square Circle is saying, I don't think it's backed up by science that sexuality is innate. The data suggests that 75 to 80% of our sexuality is determined by environment. To be honest, the jury's still out there. I've heard that these studies that suggest that it's kind of the environment, not innate. Usually, they're done by sources that want to present being gay as a choice of some
Yep.
sort. And I'm not going to get into those studies, but let's just presume that that figure is accurate for a second.
The one on screen.
Yeah, like
Okay.
75 to 80% is influence. Let's just
Mhm.
presume that.
Okay.
And I like to do that often. I'm like, okay, let's follow up on that logic
Hmm.
rather than just disproving the piece of information. We can
Sure.
still disprove the whole like way of thinking in a
Hmm.
sense, or tell them our thoughts on why this is fallacious. So if this data is correct, so 20% of them are innately, or 20% of it is innate, right?
Hmm.
So that's not that sexuality is not innate. That's still a component, but let's presume it is from the environment. Is it a conscious choice? It isn't, right? If you absorbed it from your environment somehow. So again, that brings us to, so what is immoral about it? Say it was innate or from the environment. That still doesn't change that it happened to that person. It wasn't a choice that that person made, right? So whether they were
Yeah.
born with it or they absorbed it, what do you think about that?
So I'm going to make what might be a controversial analogy, and I am not trying to say that I feel these two things are equivalent. What I'm trying to say is if somebody believes that statistic, this may also be true. Serial killers, I'm sure that some are born with some sort of mental issue that causes them to be, you know, prone to that kind of behavior, but I think a lot are from their nurture as well, growing up in difficult households, you know, interactions that they have, things that lead them to a dark place. In which case, you know, how do these things happen? Does somebody choose to do that? Again, for anybody who's trying to misquote me, I am not saying that this is what I believe. I'm saying if you believe that statistic, this may also be true. But you know, there's
But
confirmation
like
bias on both
a
sides.
serial killer at the end of the day, so whether it's influence or innate, of course, there's some kind of maybe rehabilitation or limiting their ability to cause harm while trying to, if it's possible to rehabilitate them. Because, but at the end of the day, what they're doing is absolutely harmful, right? But when it comes to like being gay,
Yeah.
there has never been any harm in it. Like people often quote things like STDs or something like that, but in today's
Well,
world, like it's more, I don't know, they're more protected against than straight people. I've heard like it's not really, people are just trying to find reasons. They already have the conclusion because
mm-hmm,
God said so, and
mm-hmm,
now they're trying to rationalize it. It's like I'm sure you've come across this theme before where Muslims say everything that God tells you to do is for your own benefit. Like you pray
mm-hmm.
for your own benefit. So there's a hidden wisdom in it. There's a hidden benefit for you. You just don't know it yet. Did you come across that kind of mentality?
Absolutely. And I think, ooh, sorry, I'm trying to get organized mentally here. So I think,
Wait, well, while you think about that, I just want to mention to the Muslim viewers, I know a lot of them are already starting to probably drop off because we're talking about this topic, but don't worry, we're going to get to the meat of the conversation today. But
are you
this just
watching your metrics?
not exactly, but I just know, like, even when this is, after it's released, I know that
Yeah.
people lose focus in the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
especially if the topic doesn't interest them. So don't worry, it's not all going to be about the LGBT, but yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, your question was about, you want to re-summarize it for me? Because I got distracted by the other thing you said.
Oh, me too. Me too. We were talking about this. We
Please.
both get distracted.
Yeah.
Uh, okay, so one more thing before we get to Hassan Ruban's question. Um, this square circles is saying my main worry is that sometimes the intolerance is both ways. What I get most often is that even it is even wrong for a religious person to even say that it is a sin or disordered. Do you want to
Ooh,
give
that's
your thoughts
interesting.
first? Do you think it's intolerant to tell a religious person they're wrong for that, or to criticize them, or like what kind of reaction would you think is intolerant
Hmm.
for, towards
I think
homophobia?
it's gonna. This is just a quick thought, and I may
Mhm.
edit this later, but my initial answer is it has partly to do with, I guess, the vocabulary you choose and whether you're willing to listen and adapt and rephrase things, or whether you're so stuck in your own mindset that you can't hear someone else. But I think also it's whether you privately hold certain beliefs, whether you discuss them in your inner circle, whether you are public and broadcasting them and trying to affect change, whether you are taking action physically on anything. There's levels. And personally, I would prefer not to restrict anyone's freedom because, here in the US, we have freedom of speech, but there's also consequences for your actions. And so it's a tricky topic. A lot of it is going to be very subjective and case by case. So it's hard to say definitively this is the answer. But I guess to illustrate two quick extremes, we have Saudi Arabia, we have France, we have forced religion and forced not religion. Um, and I don't think either of those are correct. I think both of them are dangerous places to live these days. And I think somewhere in the middle is a lot better.
Okay. When people see me not push back on people's objection to France, I just want to remind them I'm not here to argue for or against France. Honestly, I don't know in depths what they're actually doing, like how it's enforced or what the rationale behind it is. But I am not championing them as some kind of secular heroes. And yes, I'm going to comment on this. What I'm thinking is that stance, that religious stance that you would have about gay
Hmm.
people. Um, it's not simply an agree to disagree kind of thing. I mean, at the end of the day, I can't change someone's mind about it,
Hmm.
about how they feel about it. But just asserting it and making it seem like it's normal, or like it's normal to say something like that, is it's not intolerant to push back on it. Like you said, there's freedom of speech. You can come out and say, being gay is a sin or immoral or gross, or I don't want it. You have the freedom to say that, but people will look at you as a hateful person. Just like someone
Yeah.
can come out and say all Muslims are this and that, or like
Hmm.
people of color and this are this and that.
Yeah.
Um, I'm not going to get into like hate speech laws and things like that, but at the very basic level, if say you lose your job because you're saying something so hateful, it's
Yep.
because people don't want to be associated with someone who says people of color and so or so and so. So
Hmm.
this is the same thing in my opinion. So it's not merely just some kind of opinion of my because it's a religious opinion, you can't really tell me anything, or else it's intolerant. Like I've seen
Hmm.
people pull the Islamophobia card, because when someone says Islam is homophobic, even though the person is homophobic, they're saying it's Islamophobic to put a bad label on me or Islam because of my views. Does that make sense? Yeah.
60%.
Okay, let's I don't know if I can find the comment again, but yeah, there we go. So, do you
Oh
still
yeah.
believe in God? And if you do, how would you define it?
Yeah, I thought a lot about this. So I don't plan to adopt another religion because after nearly 20 years of intentional exploration, at this point, I just think they're all corrupted by humans. But as always, the most important things in life, in my opinion, are to follow the golden rule, which is do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and the campsite rule, which is leave it as or better than you found it. Uh, so I still believe God is real and present, that it, I don't know, he, she created everything in the beginning and set up laws that allow continued creation to happen, and that has a code of ethics or morals inherent in all of us that we should strive to uphold. We have free will, and I think that God intervenes when truly needed and is too awesome for us to fully comprehend. I think I went and did a whole bunch of terminology searching to just find a word so that I can start to organize my thoughts. I think I'm most closely aligned at the moment with something called panentheism, under which God is both transcendent, which means above and outside all things and beyond perception, as well as immanent, which is in, throughout, and interconnecting all things.
Okay. Um, I I have a thought about that. So you said God intervenes when it's absolutely necessary.
Hmm.
Um, what do you think the criteria is? Do you think God intervenes more often when someone asks for it? Or do you think there is some kind of hidden wisdom as to when he does intervene and when he doesn't? Because it's definitely not every time he's needed, right?
Right. Um, I think not all of us know what need means sometimes. I think there's a line between want and need. Um, and we may think we need something when in fact we want it. And I think this is part of the too awesome to understand, uh, part that I mentioned. Where that line is, I have no idea.
Mm.
But yeah.
Careful, you're pulling an Islam card here. You're saying we
Mhm.
can't comprehend it. It's that there's some kind of wisdom in it, but we just don't know.
Okay, I'll reevaluate and I'll set you up a
Yeah.
chart with like an if then, and we'll get it sorted out. No, but infographic pending.
No, I understand. I'm just curious if you had like a conclusion about that.
No,
But
this is
yeah.
still something I'm rolling around in my head. It's in progress.
Yeah. I mean, even Hasan Allan is saying, and he's been an ex-Muslim for a long time now, and
Hmm.
he thinks about this stuff a lot. He's saying, "I wish you all the best." And by the way, it's still a question I struggle with. So that's reassuring in a way.
Yeah, for sure.
And someone here said, and I want to highlight this, bruh, this is a little boring. Please bring some meathead like Dawa TikTok guys. That's good content. It got you most views. So this is specifically why I am wary of talking to even like if a Dawa person is not too abrasive, um, the conversation often turns a little sour or a little antagonistic, and I don't want that kind of controversy for views. It is useful, but I don't want to do it too often because then I don't want to attract the kind of viewer who's living for the drama. Um, I find this to be a lot more fulfilling than most of my conversations with the Dawa people, though they serve very different purposes, right? Because Rachel's not here preaching, and in the other case, I'm challenging their beliefs in a more, putting them on the spot kind of way. So yeah, if you find this boring, that's fine. You don't have to watch it. I guess you're more into the other stuff, but I would prefer the kind of audience who would rather enjoy this than the other videos. So, what do you think? Did you enjoy the similar conversations to this more, or did you see any of my conversations with Dawa people?
Um, I didn't watch a whole bunch of it because it's just not. I've heard it.
Mm,
You know, it's. Um, I feel like a lot of times, not all the time, but a lot of times in those conversations, it's about proving something. And I think if you don't actually, it's kind of like for people who have substance abuse who have to go into recovery. If you're not ready, it's not going to happen. And so, what's the point of beating somebody over the head if they don't want to hear it, if they don't want to listen? And a lot of times, it's come at as a debate, which is fine. There's lots of like respectful and structured ways to go about that, and it's a mental exercise, but it's just not for me.
fair enough. A lot of people do say that they enjoy this conversation very obviously. I mean, um, in terms of views, I don't keep an eye on this metric very much because it would just make me nervous and try to figure out what did I do wrong or there's
Yeah,
an
yeah.
algorithm. And by the way, people, please like and if you are able to subscribe and share or whatever. I know a lot of people watch without interacting too much because they're worried about revealing their identity or linking their accounts somehow. But if you can, it does help, have people come across conversations like these rather than the drama ones. Abdullah Samir says subscribed. That's the guy we were
Oh,
talking
that's the
about.
beardy guy. Yeah. Hey.
Yeah, it was my first appearance ever as Aladdin was with him.
Hmm.
Um, there's a story there, and yeah, a lot of people are actually enjoying this conversation. And like I said, it does serve a different purpose. I forgot where I was going with that, but yeah. So you were saying people were asking, what about your? Can you take us through your faith? So how did it start? How did it progress, and where is it now, and so on? So you said you
Um,
had some issues you were wrestling with. Like when did
mhm.
that begin? Or yeah,
um, Before I converted, honestly. Oh, I joined Patreon. Yeah. Okay.
I
Um,
don't like to put that word up because I don't want it to seem like I'm asking people to join, but
yeah.
it's the link is there.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Um, so the issue you said, when did the questions and the issue start? Honestly, before I even made the decision to convert, because there were certain things that had been portrayed in the media that were very present in the mindset at the time and today, that I wanted to know about. But I, again, I'm going to come back to confirmation bias. I admittedly looking for ways to dispel some of these things because I am critical of the media, especially post 9/11. Let's be honest, that was a big day. But in that, I was able to find sources that I guess told me what I needed to hear, and it wasn't until later when I learned about um, the types of levels of text or proof or acceptance, etc., and comparing and contrasting that with postings by people from certain viewpoints, or levels of liberalism or conservatism versus personal blogs, that I kind of started to realize maybe I didn't get the answer, but I got an opinion rather than something that's accepted. But yeah, things that I was questioning about, inequality between men and women, LGBT, of course, we mentioned that, contradictions within the Hadith as well as between Hadith and Quran, which is something I discussed with the Imam and did not care for the answer. Um, and the fact that the Quran's not in chronological order, how can we trust that other alterations weren't made at the same time, especially when there was some ruler in power who was the one who called for it to be standardized and reordered? Because agenda. Hello. But there were other topics that I didn't discuss with him. Those are all the ones I did bring up. But the other ones I was thinking of, things like the wife beating that we talked about last time, because there were people in the comments who said, well, actually, I know this and I know this. And I realized I've been fed a certain version. Aisha, that's a big one. Circumcision versus fitra, because come on. And then
Oh,
qada
that's an
versus,
interesting way to put it, fitra. Like that brought it up in this context because I always think of fitra as like something inside your brain or like how you think, but I guess
but
that is
there's
the
the conditions
natural.
of it too, you know?
Yeah,
Like you
yeah.
have to clip your nails, you have to groom yourself a certain way, and that's one of them for men. So, if you're born in a perfect state, why do you have to do that? And then people who justify female circumcision,
Mm.
FGM, come on, let's be honest, like forget it. I had a native-born American citizen who converted in his early 20s try to convince me that it was acceptable and an honor. And I was like,
And that's a
how
he.
much Kool-Aid how much Kool-Aid have you drank? Like, this is ridiculous.
Um, yeah, yeah, that topic is a little heavy, but as I was preparing for, I have a video already about the story of Prophet Ibrahim.
Yeah.
As I was preparing for that, it was supposed to be a very long video, or like I just, I prepared all the material, and then I'm like, ah, damn, that's gonna take like 50 minutes. Um, so I cut it into two, and in the second half, I'll probably talk about it. But I came across things about FGM just looking at the story of Prophet Ibrahim. Apparently, um, I may be misquoting this right now because I don't remember. I wrote that a long time ago. But there was a case where the prophet, well, he had a new younger wife, and his wife Hajar, I think, his wife didn't. She was a little jealous, and she wanted to hurt his new wife, even though she approved of it at first. And she swore to like cut off something like a limb or something like that. And the way that I see this a lot, where like God bargains, like for example, Ibrahim was supposed to be killing his son, but then he put a sheep there, a ram, for him to do it
Hmm.
instead. So the action is
Yep.
still happening of him slaughtering something. So in this case, Ibrahim let her do FGM on, and like that's what I've read. Again, like don't quote me
Okay.
on this yet, but the fact that I just came across this, and this apparently was maybe the first instance in Islam,
Hmm.
um, like in Islam, even though Ibrahim was before the Prophet Muhammad. So at least in the story, that was the first instance. And I came across the justifications by the sheikh saying, because it would reduce lust kind of thing and keep the woman away from sin more, and it's better for the
Yeah.
man and the. Oh, and it said, but don't overdo it because then it's harmful for the woman and the man. And that really stuck with me. Like, oh, you're worried about like the pleasure of her husband, like after doing something like that.
Yep.
Yeah. So when you said a guy, an American man, had an opinion about that, um, yeah, it's dangerous. The holy Kool-Aid can sometimes, some things can kind of sneak in, some beliefs like that.
Yeah. I mean, he was a Salafi. No great surprise there. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, yeah. Anyway, that's a bit of a heavy topic. I wanted to ask you. So,
Sorry, I left one out. There was
oh,
there was
go
there was
go
one more
for it.
thing that was on my mind I didn't ask the
Oh,
imam
go
about, which
for it.
was qada versus qadar versus inshallah. Like, how can all those three exist at the same time?
How can what? Sorry, can you go ahead?
Like predestination
Hmm.
versus our actions are written because God already knows what we will choose versus saying if God wills it. It's like, how can we have all these three concepts simultaneously?
So, yeah, that was one of my first questions, even like before I even considered that Islam could be not true.
Hmm.
I just wanted to understand it, like you probably did. Like I just wanted to make sense of it. And the conclusion is always, I've even had a sheikh tell me this, verbatim. He said it's kind of a paradox, but God is capable of solving paradoxes, right?
Hmm.
Because once you've put this theoretical God that can do anything, even outside of logic, right?
Yeah.
He can. Then it's just kind of a one size fits all answer, right? It
Hmm.
is a paradox, but don't worry about it. Just work on your faith. Just keep praying. And how did that resonate with you when people kept, pushing you towards just have faith?
I don't want to use the word trauma because I don't think it's really um, respectful to people who actually have big T and little T trauma, but it sent me right back to when I was a kid and being told by certain classmates that me and my family were going to hell, and asking questions. And oh yeah, Trinity, oh my God, don't get me started. um, Having adults tell me when I would ask them questions about, why do you believe this? You just have to have faith. And it's not enough. I think it's just a cop out answer in a lot of cases. It is sometimes legitimately the only thing we can go to because we are not advanced enough to answer certain things. But there are other issues where you could logic your way through them and find evidence and find sources and compose a logical answer, at least partially, where people just don't, and they say, have faith. And that's what I get upset about. And it brought me right back. And I was just like, oh my God, please, not this again.
Have you come across answers about this that involve some sort of philosophical argument or like some sort of debate or discussion? And this is usually a marker when they start using a lot of words that you've never heard of, and they're talking about the positions of philosophers about the contingency and the necessity for this, and therefore this and that. Have you ever come across these proofs or answers?
I have, and as you said, using a lot of words that we don't generally use. It's people who have clearly studied this stuff and it makes sense to them, and I think that's great. But if it's not accessible to me, then it's still really not an explanation that I can support, because if I can't understand it, how can I then explain it to somebody else accurately? So, how solid is that? I'm not saying I don't believe whatever it is they're trying to say. I'm just saying I don't get it. So I need the for dummies version.
Well, that's what I was thinking about is like I am often one of those dummies, and there are a lot of people they're not, you're not necessarily not smart enough to understand it. It's just that you need to be in a very different mindset. You need to go down that path and
Hmm.
dedicate time and thought to this kind of
Yeah.
thing, which you may have no interest in doing, especially like a lot of people can't focus if they have no interest. I'm sure we're all
Ding.
familiar with that.
Yep.
Um, and it could be that you don't have the luxury, like you need to figure out your spirituality and religion and so on, but you also
Mhm.
have other stuff to do. So you don't have time to, dig into philosophy when you have no background in philosophy. So
Yeah.
like you said, it makes it inaccessible. So God cannot expect us to understand something that is beyond like your specific, say the way that your specific mind works. Like
Yeah.
the answer cannot be something so roundabout. And at the end of the day, even like very intelligent people would disagree. Like they would have back and forth disagreements. Does the person who disagree, like, are they disagreeing because they're a bad person or a kafir, or because that's just their philosophical conclusion on the matter? So if that makes them a bad person, do you think that is just, in the way that God is doing this whole thing? Yeah. Like,
Does
do
it
you
make them a
think,
bad person? No.
yeah,
Um,
you know,
I that's a very, that
yeah.
has a lot of branches and smaller branches and leaves at the end. There's a lot of places to kind of go out to.
Well, let
So
me phrase it
I'm
in a
just going to
different
simplify
way.
it and say, okay, yes,
Sure.
please. No,
Well, I was going to say,
rephrase.
how did you see the test? So, what was the test of faith for you? Like in your mind, what was God testing, or how were you looking at it that way? Were you trying to gain more faith to pass the test? Like, how did you view um, God's judgment
Judgment of
of
what?
of you? Like, how did you
Hmm.
think God was going to judge you? And I don't use judge in the negative sense, as in harshly pick apart everything, even though that's kind of what he's doing. I
Hmm.
mean, what did you think the criteria was on your test, or did you view it as a test? Life, Islam, that kind of thing?
When you say test, are you referring to this recent like revelation and decision?
No, no, just in
Of what
general, just
then?
Islam in general. Because I've noticed, for example, like the approach of some people would be, it makes me happy, it's spirituality, fulfills my purpose, and so on. But
Hmm.
um, some people who are born into Islam, they're given the idea, the very real idea, that it is a test. This life is a test. Islam is a test. Did you
Hmm.
see it that way? Did you feel
Um,
like judged or watched or tested?
I think any judgment I felt was the result of things people would say. So, for example, when I just converted, I kept it private for quite a while because I was still trying to figure out, what I was going to do with this and what it was going to mean to me and what kind of lifestyle changes I was going to make. But once people started to know about it, um, there were comments. I'm sure they were well-meaning because, a lot of people, they're trying to look after your immortal soul after all. But I would have comments like, you know, from my ex's family, for example. Well, if she came into this and now later on you guys are married, teach her how to pray. And they would keep reminding me when it was the Advent, for example. Or there was one comment where some uncle, they were all giving advice on how to help me settle in when we decided to move to his home country temporarily because I didn't last. But teach her how to pray and teach her how to wear the scarf and teach her this and teach her that. And a lot of it was just like, how dare you try to dictate my life? If you want to be welcoming, perhaps focus on asking, what do you need and what do you need help with, rather than saying, this is what you have to do, because you don't know any better than anybody else or better than me at the end of the day, because most of your knowledge comes from being handed down person to person. There's a whole bunch of superstition and culture mixed in. And, if you went and did your time to do some more research, you would find that a lot of the things you're saying are partly or not true. So, thanks, but no thanks.
That's okay. I want to do two things. I want to play devil's advocate for those
Sure.
Muslims, and I want to contrast your view of it with mine as someone who was born into it.
Okay.
Um, so, first of all, to play devil's advocate, the way that they view it, which is similar to how I used to view it and how a
Mm-hmm.
lot of Muslims view it, is they're looking out for you. So they're not telling you to pray and whatnot. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of flawed human, be it like gossip or wanting to micromanage someone, and all this stuff is still there. But at
Mm-hmm.
the core of it, it could be from a good place of, I want her to go to heaven too. So she needs to learn this stuff ASAP before she dies. Uh, um, she dies not a good believer, not a practicing believer, or so on.
Yeah.
Like for example, I remember in prayer, often every Friday, depends on the mosque you go to, but this wasn't unusual or some kind of extreme of a mosque. When they're like after the khutbah, he would be calling to, like the imam would be calling for us to line up, and they would say something like, pray every prayer or pray this prayer as if it's your last. Like that was always on the minds of people like that. Has that ever
Yeah.
come across your mind? Like, what if I die right now? Have I done enough?
In the last live stream, I said that I think intention counts for a lot. And I think if there's something I wasn't doing, it's because I couldn't. And I think God would be understanding of that. So I didn't really make myself feel guilty a whole lot at all. It was mostly the result of what other people would say. And for some of the bigger picture things, I hear what you're saying, but at the same time, there's a way to say things. There's a tone of voice you can use. There's vocabulary you can choose. Your facial expression. And when you're looking at me like you're super angry and that I'm wrong and bad, and you know, at that point, I'd been in for a couple years, but I'd been basically on my own because I converted before uh, our our marriage, and so I've been doing what I could and struggling to find reliable resources because there's so much uh, discussion and disagreement about the right way to do things. And even then, people would nitpick on things as well. Not even big picture stuff, but like your hand has to be touching the fingers. You have to have your finger straight. You have to move your finger in a circle. You can't look up. You have to close your eyes. You shouldn't close your eyes. Like, I really don't think these details matter. I really don't.
Mhm.
I think just be a good person, do the best you can, and that's what you got to do.
Fair enough. And I'm sure at the beginning, did you feel like, I'm still slowly making my way into Islam, so, God's not going to judge me too harshly because I'm not yet fully, a practicing Muslim in every single way? Did you feel that way? Like you had
100%.
leeway with it, right?
Absolutely, because I know myself well enough at this point to know that anything that I want to do long term needs to happen gradually. Because I see a lot of other converts out there who, um, for the women who start wearing hijab immediately, put on a niqab immediately, move to a Muslim majority country, get a husband immediately, have kids right away, and if that's good for them, great. But for me, that would be a sure sign that I would leave almost immediately because it's too much too fast. It's just overwhelming. For the men, they immediately grow out their beard. They start rolling their pants up, similar types of things. And again, if that works for you, great. But I can't sustain that. It's such a big change so fast that it's too much. So yeah, going along at a pace that's healthy, that's going to let me make more long-term changes and implementations, much better.
So did you feel that that attitude did you carry that forward? Did you think it's going to carry forward forever? Like I'm just doing my best. I don't have to worry too much about what's going to happen on the day of judgment. Like, do you ever think about hell? Like not right now, but as that we're going to get to that too. But as a Muslim, not in the beginning, did you see yourself just settling into that mentality?
I I've always had a very strong moral compass. Not just, having things taught to me by people who brought me up, but innately as well. And it's really hard for me to lie. Like I turn bright red immediately. I feel so bad about it. So doing anything that I know is wrong is something I can't do. And if there's something that I accidentally do or that somebody interprets in a way I didn't mean it, and then I find out, then I immediately go and try to make up for it with them and say, hey, this is what I meant, but I'm sorry that this is how it came across, and I'll make sure to, be mindful of that in the future. So am I conscious of hell? Like, is it a possibility? Sure. But honestly, I kind of think a lot of people, not just Muslims, but people in general, have it backwards. I think you have to try harder to get into hell than into heaven. I think most people are good at their core. I think people make mistakes, but I think that unless you are consistently and consciously choosing to do wrong, that you're just another human. We all exist on a spectrum in many senses of the word, and only those at one extreme in this sense are going to be poorly surprised.
I have a lot of thoughts about that, from my point of view
Hmm.
on how I saw it when I was a Muslim. Um, but so, sorry, let me collect my thoughts for a second.
Hmm.
So, would you say that you focused on God's mercy or reward or God's greatness more than the punishment?
Yep.
Okay. Was that a conscious choice or did that just happen?
I say a little bit of both, but I think it's more just a natural thing.
Because you're an
Maybe
optimist or something? Like, are you a positive person?
it's funny because I didn't used to be. I used to be. I wouldn't say pessimistic. I'm highly sarcastic, and I very quickly, when I'm evaluating any type of situation, do like this if then process in my head and work out what's, I think, the most likely outcome and try to figure out how to deal with it. But during that, it can um, it can present a lot of outcomes that won't be favorable, which can lead me to get a bit negative about things. So I make a conscious choice, which is now becoming more of an automatic thing, more of a habit, but I make a conscious choice to think about the other side and say, maybe this is going to happen, but here's another positive outcome. And we don't know if this is the outcome. And being prepared for the most likely possible eventualities is going to help deal with it. So if something's going to go wrong, we can do our best to make it as good as it can be.
Okay. That's a good attitude to have.
Hmm.
Um, I wanted to highlight this. I hope it didn't interrupt you or anything, but I didn't want to
Hmm.
forget. Um, I think it's just ironic in the middle of what we're talking about. Someone saying Islam is love. Don't listen to that guy. He's lying or ignorant.
Which
Um,
guy?
me.
Wait, what?
Because yeah, see, that's the thing. It's not. I don't even know what they're talking about at the moment.
Me
Like, what am
neither.
I lying? I didn't say. I didn't even get to the part where I'm like, hey, like Islam instills this and this in you, and so on. It's obvious that the way that you took it is the way that different than the way that I took it, and not by conscious choice per se. I would say
Hmm.
not. It's just the way that we were introduced to it.
Hmm.
But it's just funny that I always get accused of being lying or ignorant or hateful, but no one's pointing out specifics
That's okay,
about.
because a bunch of people before were saying that I don't know what I'm talking about. They pity me, this poor woman, etc. I'm like,
Yeah,
thanks, but I'm good. I'm okay.
yeah. Okay, so I have a lot of thoughts, and I might even presume some things about where you are coming from, and correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay.
So, the way that I saw hell growing up, I was reading the Quran since I was young. My parents wanted to give me a good foundation. Like regardless of what the environment around me was, they wanted to make sure that I have a good a good foundation to fall back on, so I don't need to be micromanaged. Like it's just going to be innate to me at that point. And they started with religion, among other things. I think my mother raised me decently well,
Mhm.
um, and religion was at the foundation of it, but it wasn't really a motivator for my moral compass. Not really. It was never about God is watching, therefore I need to do this, or I'm going to get good deeds if I give this poor man, a few, whatever currency.
Mhm.
That didn't really cross my mind. Sometimes I would think, oh, that's a good, nice bonus. I didn't realize I was racking up points,
Yeah.
but and I knew about the point system. I just didn't think of it actively.
Mhm.
And it wasn't that I had a negative, pessimistic view of Islam or anything. It was just a default to me. There was no wiggle room about am I assessing its truthfulness. I was way too young for that.
Yeah.
And because I was reading the Quran, the amount of times that I've come across the punishment, the hell, all these mentions, it wouldn't cancel out. People say it cancels out with God's mercy or the promises of heaven. They don't seriously, like, they don't just cancel out like that. So just because, if anything, it's more like whiplash abusive. Someone going from, I love you so much, but if you disobey me, I'm going to beat the hell out of you. But don't forget, I love you. They
Mhm.
don't, these two things don't just neutralize each other. And in the beginning, I wasn't thinking about hell from a fear point of view. Even though I was reading all these graphic descriptions in my mind, it was, oh, that's not for me. That's for bad people. It wasn't even that's for um, non-Muslims. In my mind at first, it was that's for bad people who deserve it because I'm told God is fair, so I don't even need to worry about that. And I wouldn't think too hard of the graphicness of it in the beginning. But then it was always on my mind that, wow, that's such a horrible outcome. And it wasn't me thinking about myself, like, I hope I don't end up there. That wasn't a possibility when I was younger. And then I started learning more and more about how even Muslims don't have 100% shot at going into heaven. Um, you could be a good Muslim, but you make mistakes, and your sins outweigh your good deeds, and you could still go to hell. And my concern started to grow. So hell was on my mind a lot more than it would have been on your mind. Not
Mhm.
because the people around me were teaching me negative Islam. I was literally learning from the Quran. And it wasn't just
Yeah.
me reading it by myself and then coming to conclusions. It was the sheikh telling me some context about this is what happened, and this is why these people deserve hell, and this is what God is promising. And God is also promising all this good stuff. And the good stuff appealed to me. The child in me, for example, was thinking about, oh, I can fly in heaven.
Mhm.
It's like um, I don't know if you play video games, but like a sandbox game where you get to it's like a giant sandbox. You get to make whatever you want, do whatever you want. Obviously, I wasn't thinking of creation or anything, but you have a
Mhm.
world that you get to enjoy and do whatever you want in. So the specifics of the reward never really appealed to me. Like the
Mhm.
rivers and the gardens. I'm like, oh yeah, nice. I like gardens. But the whole, like, if you pray this many times, you get a bigger house in Jannah, or you get one
Mhm.
more tree in Jannah. That never really appealed to me. And it made no sense because once you have everything you want, what are the extra layers above that? Like, how
Mhm.
much more reward can you get? I
Yeah.
suppose punishment, you can see how it could get worse, maybe, but reward, if you can, or like, if you have all the wishes you can have, how much better does it get? Why do you need three houses or four houses or 10? You know, did,
And in
did that ever cross
addition,
your mind?
well, in addition though, why would you want all those other things if heaven is complete ecstasy? Then why do you need more than what you've already been given? Haven't you been automatically given what it is you want in your heart of hearts? And if you look at someone else and you compare, is it possible to be jealous in heaven? Because why would you want what they have if it's not what's good for you? Like,
No, God would
this has just
extract
come
all
to my
these.
mind. Yeah,
Yeah,
but
that's the answer. There's no negative feelings there. But is
yeah,
that
so
really
then
you
so then
then?
why do you need something else? Well, I don't know, man. I haven't really thought about this a whole lot because I guess when you were saying that, three different things came to mind. First of all, have you seen the TV show The Good Place? Because they
Yes.
tabulate. Okay, because
Yeah.
love that show.
Yeah.
Um, but then about hell and the motivation to do good, or heaven and the motivation to do good, I think, again, as I mentioned before, in response to the question of do I still believe in God, I think we all have an innate morality or code of ethics. Feeding the hungry isn't something that I do because it will bring me good. Even when I was, in Islam, it's something you do because it's the right thing. You don't need a carrot and a stick. We should be doing the right thing because we live in a community and no man or woman is an island. And then the other thing that what you were saying made me think of was, what punishment is there for those who are charged with carrying out religiously dictated punishments? Like, why should humans be responsible for carrying out God's justice on his behalf?
Yeah, that's a good point. I always had that attitude too. Like when people drew the prophet, for example, I was thinking, God can take care of that.
Yep.
He doesn't need us to be his soldiers in this world.
Hmm.
Um, Even the whole spreading Islam thing, why would there even need to be the extensions, even if it was very peaceful? Why do we need to do God's job less
Hmm.
convincingly that he is able to?
Yep.
So that doesn't make sense. A quick tangent. There's a comment here that not a nice comment that I want to address. So someone's saying a man was
Oh,
burnt in
yeah.
Pakistan. We briefly mentioned this, you and I, off air. Does she know that Pakistani Muslims are the ones who deceived her into accepting this cult? So I don't know if you were actually like talking to Pakistani Muslims or not. Um, I'm going to comment on this comment here. It doesn't make sense in the context of what we're talking about. First of all, people keep not realizing that you just said in the beginning you're not a Muslim anymore, or
Hmm.
you're leaving Islam. However, at the pace that you want,
Hmm.
and they don't realize that even if you say this to a random Muslim, what is the point? So extremism, like someone else put it, it doesn't turn off a lot of people from religion. Even if the commenter's point is to disprove Islam or get people to leave, it doesn't necessarily turn people off, because it's easy to think, oh, that's just an extremist, that's just not the correct version, and you wouldn't think of it further, right? Is that what happened to you when you came across bad things at the hands of bad Muslims? What did you
Yeah.
think of it?
So, after 9/11, when Islam was in the media a lot, there was a lot of negative portrayals. But at the same time, there were pockets in several communities where Muslims and non-Muslims were kind of joining together and saying, this does not represent us, or this does not represent my neighbors, for those who were not Muslim. And it was an interesting time. It was a very difficult and sad time, but it was interesting because you started to see more voices, more, you know, I don't want to say modern or progressive voices, but just not, people who were the ones who were committing this with this mindset. So, yeah, I think there is a distance. I think people who are extremists think that they are the only ones who are doing things correctly. So they buy into their own construction of reality for what it is. But everybody else who's in the religion does not generally accept that they are followers. They think that these extremists are the ones doing it the wrong way. And we can see that in lots of different religions. It's not just in Islam, like Westport Baptist for Christians, for example. Most people denounce them.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I thought too. I mean, as a
Hmm.
Muslim, no amount of Charlie Hebdo or whatever other thing that happened made me feel like this is not from God.
Hmm.
Eventually, I started thinking, why is the language so imprecise that there is room for this kind of thing?
Yeah.
Like sometimes the things that they do, that these people do, you can very easily negate it with another verse, right? And say God said, don't be fair, and this is not fair, or something
Hmm.
vague like that. But at the same time, you can also support it in a certain way. Even if I disagree with it, I'm saying based on certain parts of the text,
Yeah.
even if they are wrong to take it in that context only, the fact that they could do that honestly, like without meaning, without having bad intentions. Not all of them are doing this because they're evil people and they want to cause harm to other people. They genuinely think in their minds that this is what God wanted. So are they thinking that because they're bad people, or because God could have done a better job at conveying that message? Has that ever crossed your mind?
Not in those terms. but I do wonder how people get to that point, because we can even see there was the case of those girls who went from the UK to one of the like ISIS controlled places a couple years back, and the one, what was her name, like Shemima Begum or something. She was
Mhm.
trying to come back and be repatriated, and she was a dual citizen, and somehow the UK stripped her of her citizenship, but there was a lot of controversy over whether that was legal or not. They didn't want her to come back. She had at least one child with her at the time, as well as some others who hadn't made it. And how do you get to that point where you decide to leave everything behind and go into this kind of situation if you didn't have to? You know, it's very perplexing. I don't really know a lot about it. I don't want my Google algorithm to get skewed and have all that kind of content showing up all the time. So I admittedly haven't looked into it that much, but it's a big question mark. How does somebody get there who didn't grow
Mhm.
up there?
I mean, for some people, they would use that as some kind of again, I don't want to use the word argument, but in their minds, that makes Islam less likely to be true because it's that imperfect that people can arrive at these conclusions honestly.
Yeah,
Um,
I guess.
that didn't really cause my doubts in Islam, but it's
Hmm.
something that I came across or thought of later on
Hmm.
that I would expect better towards the end of my spiritual journey, I suppose, or towards as I came closer to concluding my conclusions about Islam. I was thinking to myself, I expect better than from God. God wouldn't be offended that I think of him more highly than the way that people are presenting him. And by people, I mean even moderates, even progressives. I still think that if God is perfect, perfection is much better than that. Um,
Hmm.
that wasn't a motivator for me, and it seems like it doesn't cross the minds of a lot of people, especially like in the beginning of questioning. So what I'm getting from you is that wasn't a line of thinking for you, right?
Not especially.
Okay. And one thing I want to say is I'm not really surprised or faulting you for not thinking about certain things in Islam,
Hmm.
considering, how long have you been a Muslim for?
6.5 years.
Okay. Yeah, so 6.5 years, and you're starting off from a point of you already have a life going on, right?
Hmm.
So the amount of time that one would spend thinking about religion if they started off later on, I mean, I'm sure you've thought about it from before, but not specifically this one religion. So I understand how, like, don't take it the wrong way if I'm asking if something crossed your mind and it didn't.
No, no.
Yeah, because I know a lot of people would see it a different way. They would comment like, "See that she didn't even ponder her religion that much." I don't
You know
think
what?
that's it.
Those are the people I ignore in the comments who aren't getting it. Like, that's fine.
Yeah. No, there's a certain time when you just have to let them say what they want to say and just
Yeah, yeah.
ignore it. But I also like to make a point out of it sometimes
Hmm.
and highlight
Yeah.
how my thoughts about it. Um, Even other people who've been in Islam as long as I have, it really depends on how you started and how your life was, and if you were put in a position, where you had the time to think about it.
Hmm.
So yeah, I just wanted to briefly mention that. Um, yeah, did you? So you said you didn't think about hell too much.
No.
I want to contrast that with how I felt. So I mentioned that as I grew up, I started thinking about hell more, and it wasn't really about fear of me going to hell.
Hmm.
But the moment I started having questions about predestination and free will, like you
Yeah,
mentioned,
yeah.
and some of the other like core ideas, like what is a disbeliever? Like, are disbelievers actually disobeying God, or do they literally just they don't think it's God telling them that? So are they really culpable for it? Once I
Yep.
started having these questions again as a Muslim, not thinking that this is gonna, oh hey, he just made it on stream finally, um, not thinking that this is going to disprove Islam or anything, I was starting to have fear that it's bad that I'm not accepting these answers, right? It's bad that I can't do what everyone else seems to be able to do. Like, what's wrong with me and my faith? And that's when I started having subconscious fears about hell, because I'm not like, what if I'm not good enough of a Muslim because I can't wholeheartedly believe this? Even if I continue following and praying, God knows what's in your heart. So how can he judge something that isn't in my control? For example, I was at some point I couldn't love the Prophet, without even knowing everything horrible in the hadiths and so on, there was certain behavior that I just couldn't get myself to feel like I couldn't relate. For example, I was told by my mother, and this is a Sahih Hadith, I believe, the way that they idolized him, even though we keep being told he's not God. But for example, he would do wudu, and the water that he used, they would like rush to fight over it and
Oh
use it.
yeah.
And it crossed my mind again. I was a Muslim at the time, and I was thinking I can never achieve that level of love for the Prophet or loving him more than my parents and my and everyone in my life. I okay, he is the Prophet. He sounds like a very good guy. Is
Mhm.
what I thought. Uh, but is God going to punish me? Because the Prophet himself said that you need to love the Prophet more than your mother and father, which is a very narcissistic thing to say. But did that ever cross your mind, that kind of guilt for not loving the Prophet enough or something like that?
Um, no, I wasn't really fed that rhetoric. Like, I'm aware of it, and I know that there are people who do spend time thinking about it, as well as, um, I don't want to say pushing it on other people, but like making other people aware of it. But it's not something that really came up for me much. So yeah, it didn't really bother me.
Fair enough. Um, so going back to what I was saying about hell, so that's when I started fearing it a bit more and more, thinking I'm doing everything right, but I can't control that part, right? The part of being convinced with these answers and having the kind of blind faith that other people have, even before I was thinking that I could ever walk away. That was not an option in my mind. And my fear at the time was more as well for everybody else. That got what got me questioning about what is disbelief and how would you present Islam to a non-believer or a disbeliever. I don't know if these words are the same. Someone who disbelieves, it's put as a position of arrogance and decisiveness, that I disbelieve, I disprove your God, when it's actually more like non-belief. It's
Yeah.
never been established. When I started thinking about that, how could I change someone like that? Like, I didn't want to be a dawah person per se, but I was thinking, how would I present Islam to someone who's never been in Islam? And
Yeah.
that's when I started to realize that you kind of can't. So how did that happen for you? Because you weren't in Islam. What convinced you?
Like when I decided to convert, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, so we touched on this in the previous one. So there was three
Mhm.
basic things which in the last several weeks I have received a lot of feedback on.
Mhm.
One of them was related to gender roles, especially as a reaction to the status quo at the time. And yeah, people have presented a lot of alternate evidence and things that were not coming up in my searches at the time, which do put things in a different light. Also, the scientific miracles in the Quran, which I am aware of some of the issues with those, but there are plenty others that I haven't, necessarily read or encountered the counter argument to. And then the third was the commandment to continue seeking knowledge and learning um, throughout a lifetime.
Okay. And I always thought to myself, I mean, to me, maybe I was putting myself in the shoes of the disbeliever, as this is what me as a disbeliever, this wouldn't convince me, right? If I met
Yeah.
someone like me. And ironically, it's like Allah sent me someone like that. When I went to university, I met one of my roommates was an atheist. He
Hmm.
wasn't a militant atheist by any means.
Yeah.
Um, if anything, I was the one saying, "Hey, I'm sure you have questions about Islam, not to join or anything, but you see Muslims around and you don't know why they behave or believe certain things. So I am
Mhm.
one. So ask me."
Oh,
And
you were the Mughal,
what's a Mughal?
Muslim Google.
Oh, I
It
did
gets
not know that word.
exhausting, man. Oh yeah.
No, he wasn't. He actually like he was utilizing it very well and not all the time or anything. He
Yeah.
wasn't grilling me about Islam.
Hmm.
But for example, he's never asked someone the question, why is a man allowed four wives? But that's a
Yeah.
very not like big picture question. That's a specific thing. But there are other
Yeah.
big picture questions as well. Like maybe in a sense he did have this kind of conversation with me before I even realized it, and not on purpose. He was trying to understand what I believe, and I was trying to understand what he believed.
Hmm.
So now that I think about it, I did not realize that I did that very young. That's kind of magical, actually. And funny enough, I was hanging out with him yesterday, the same person, where we're still
Oh, nice.
friends like years and years later. But those conversations got me thinking because he was a canvas for me because he's very like me in so many ways. We think alike in so many ways, and
Hmm.
our conversations are typically pretty stimulating.
Hmm.
And that was the person I was thinking about before I met. Here's the disbeliever who wants to think about this, who is going to approach it from the same angle as me. So there are disbelievers out there, non believers, I suppose, who the angles that people present dawah today will work on. But so different approaches for different people. I just didn't really think of it that way till right now. So thank you for making me realize it.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
there's different approaches too, like different agendas almost. It sounds like your agenda is similar to mine, which is to exchange and to learn. Not necessarily with any intention of it going somewhere, but just to be more aware of the world we live in. Whereas people who are like the Dawa men, I see them more having an agenda of giving. Let me give you what I know so that you can have this thing, but they're not necessarily looking for something back unless it's to transition to their next point they're trying to make. Which I understand that's not going to apply to everybody. This is a generalization, but it's just the main difference I see.
Okay. And a couple of things here. Someone's saying, Khalid Fan, hold on, I know, says Allah is using his men to spread his religion, not women, just men. The West is embracing Islam. Islam is the religion of peace. So I'm not going to contest that last part because I don't think it's fair to say any religion is a religion of peace in general. Maybe some other obscure religions out there, but um, everybody, Muslims often say this. When I say Islam is not convincing to the majority of non-believers, for honest reasons, they say, "What about this convert or that convert?" And unfortunately, they use people like you as a kind of a poster child for, see, even non-Muslims can join Islam, and we got one more. And I want to ask you two things about how you felt about that, or if you felt it at all, or how you
Mhm.
feel about it now. And secondly, I want to tell him that people don't usually see the deconversion stories because I don't think the Muslim community would want you to come out and like they don't want to hear about you leaving Islam, do they?
It's not viewpoint affirming, is it?
No. Like,
Hmm.
they don't use that as a counter example, or they don't balance out, the conversions of, people in the West are joining, but you don't talk about them leaving. A lot of them, unfortunately, like they have a change of heart. Well, not unfortunately, but they changed their situation again.
Yeah.
So yeah, did you feel that way that people were championing you as some kind of symbol?
Um, Only once or twice. In general, no. In general, most people were just kind of like, "Oh, you're a convert? Cool, welcome." But there were one or two instances where I don't have all the details, but I'm just kind of remembering little pieces where there was somebody who was telling me, "Oh, you're so inspirational." And I was like, "Okay, thanks, I guess." Like that's a bit weird.
Mhm.
I'm uncomfortable now. Or somebody who would say, "Oh, I love converts." And I was like, "Yeah." And especially the way the rest of your conversations going and some of the language you're using, like I'm pretty sure you're a fetishizer, so I'm not into that. Gross. But yeah, for the most part, no, didn't come up.
Yeah. Interesting. It obviously depends on your circles, and I've seen that more not directed at the convert themselves, but
Hmm.
more in a roundabout way, talking maybe not even specifically about a certain convert, but just like, "Hey, we got one more on our team," kind of thing.
Yeah. Hmm.
Um, I think it stems from, okay, this is going to be very controversial, and this is not usually the kind of thing that I talk about, but from anecdotally, I see that a lot of Muslims from certain backgrounds have a little bit of an inferiority complex compared to like the West, and that's why the West always comes up. And if they see like a secular country that's doing better than their country, for example, they think, okay, so even a person who is coming from a more privileged or I don't know how to phrase it, but from a better position is going to join Islam. That is proof that even like smart white people can join Islam. You know what I mean? has,
It is interesting you say this because I had just been writing down something to bring up about the West as a term. Because let's be honest, when people say the West, they're not contrasting it to the North, South, or the East. What they mean by the West is white English speaking countries. And Australia, New Zealand are not in the geographic West. The UK is right there. South Africa, one of the official languages is English. That's in the Eastern Hemisphere as well. So this term always makes me laugh when people talk about Western culture, Western influences. They mean white English speaking, and a lot of times they specifically mean North American.
how did you feel about that, or did you notice that at all before?
I have noticed that in several different spheres, not just in Islam, but also I used to be a language teacher working abroad, and I heard about the West a lot. Now, the place I was working was in the Eastern Hemisphere, but again, Australia, right there. So, yeah, I think there's just certain issues with terms we use. I'm sure at some point we'll evolve and find a better way to describe these things that's a little more honest and accurate, but it does, every time somebody talks about the West, it's always, it just sets off a little flag, not a red or a green flag, just a flag in my head, and my ears prick up, and I'm interested to hear what comes next.
Oh yeah, like a cat. Like, oh, what's the next one? Yeah,
Yeah, it's like a road sign. Where are we going now?
yeah. Um, I noticed some chat about the word revert. Um,
Oh God,
what did
this
you think about
again.
that as a Muslim, and what do you think about it now?
Well, I was mansplained to in this call with the imam because I said he asked something about my background. I said, "Oh, I
The
converted X
call
number of
like
years."
recently, you said after
Yeah,
our
yeah,
call. Okay,
yep.
so just
And
for
he,
people who are not aware, like after our call, you had a 45-minute call. You said with a local imam.
yep,
You
yep.
thought it was a moderate or progressive, is how you phrased it.
Yes, I did. I thought so because earlier in the year, I had been part of an interfaith event, helping out, and one of the people who was from a Christian background had asked, "What about the LGBT issue?" And this imam had said some really nice things that I'd never heard before publicly. Uh, there were people, usually women, who privately would discuss these views, but for a man who was a scholar and an imam publicly to say this was huge.
Hmm.
And he said, well, Islam's a religion of peace, which we just went over that, and it teaches compassion, mercy, understanding, forgiveness, etc. So we should be trying to work together, and we shouldn't be, you know, um, making anybody feel like an outsider. What's the word? Like shunning. We shouldn't be shunning anybody. But again, when I had the call, he said a different story that was, not at all compatible with what I believe. Um,
Yeah, we'll get back to that later.
yeah,
And I don't
yeah.
want to
I
derail
remember we
you.
don't want people to tune
Yeah.
out and get too much on one issue,
No, no,
but
I don't want to derail you from what you were talking about that during that call, the word revert when he was,
yeah, so
yeah.
he mansplained to me right in the first couple minutes when he was asking about my background, and I said, "Oh, I converted 6.5 years ago." He said, "Oh, well, actually, in Islam we say revert because everyone's born Muslim, and it just means you hadn't accepted Islam yet, and you were brought up in a different way." And I was like, "This is an issue of language. This is not an issue of belief. This is not a central thing we need to spend time on. And for you to condescend to me, I didn't say this, but for you to condescend to me like this, like, does not really set the stage well for what we're about to discuss." In my mind, the two words are equivalent. It's just a difference of the way you conceptualize about, how the religion exists around the world. Both terms are equal, but when people want to hammer home, it has to be revert. That's when I get frustrated. If someone chooses to use either term, I don't care. But yeah, when you won't give it up, just come on, find something else.
Okay. Can I give you my thoughts on that?
I'll go
Um,
on then.
I feel like it's, and you would probably be more justified to feel that way, but I feel like it's condescending and obnoxious, not to like the conversation that you had with the sheikh. I mean, the concept itself. Someone telling you, no, 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 you are a Muslim, you just don't know it yet. It's like the ex-Muslims in the comments who are saying, "Oh yeah, you're gonna be an apostate. You just don't. Trust
Ooh.
me." It's
Okay.
the
Yeah.
same thing, and that's why I
Mhm.
tell them don't use that tone, because even if you are right, it's just it first of all, you're gonna push the person away from
Mhm.
that. They're gonna be like, "No, well, I'm gonna dig deeper."
Yep.
And, but even if they don't, it's very condescending to like, it's almost like, "No, I'm not gonna let you have this. I'm not gonna let
Yeah.
you talk down to me and say," even if they're not talking down to you, saying, "That's the default. You were just not right before. You didn't
Yeah.
know. It's okay. You were misled." Like,
Yeah.
that's when people say misled, for example, like ex-Muslims,
God.
the
Yeah.
soft position on it, if they don't say they're evil and arrogant and this and that, they're just lost and misled, right?
Hmm.
Um,
Poor, stupid people who don't know any
yeah.
better. They're so uneducated and backwards. Like,
Or
actually,
they've been like traumatized, or it's the people around
yeah,
them who are bad, or whatever it may be. I see that the same way when someone's like, the default is Islam. You're a revert. You're just coming back,
yeah.
and it gives off
And
very
again,
creepy vibes.
yeah, it does. And I understand why people phrase it that way. I understand where the term comes from, and it's fine if you believe that. My issue is just when you want to try to tell me that I'm referring to myself in the wrong terms. That's not actually your business. Yeah.
Um, wait, no, 1 second. That's not the comment I wanted.
Oh,
This
I
one,
read it anyway.
this comment, Khalid fan. Hold on, the same person was saying, "You believe humans came from chimpanzees?"
Did we
Uh,
talk about that? Did I say
N
that?
no, and
Okay.
sorry to plug, but my previous video specifically talks about, well, it doesn't talk about evolution, but it talks about the
Hmm.
Big Bang and this kind of point. It's about whataboutism.
Yeah.
Basically, no one's mentioned evolution right now, and you don't
Hmm.
even know if Rachel or I believe evolution is how we all came to be, or we came from chimpanzees, which isn't accurately how evolution describes it or whatever, but when they can't address the points being made, or even just the not even necessarily points, whatever is being talked about, cognitive dissonance makes them jump to, well, what about this? And
Hmm.
maybe it's phrased as a more like a mockery or accusation, or taking a position after they've presumed that you believe in something nonsensical. I don't
Hmm.
know. Did you face a lot of that as a Muslim and afterwards? Like whataboutism
Oh,
during the conversations with sheikhs, for example?
it's hard to say. Because I don't know that I have fully defined the term, nor could identify more subtle instances of it. So I don't know that I can answer that.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I'm looking right now at, let's see if I can find it. So I had conversations a couple years ago, or maybe longer, with a bunch of different sheikhs from different backgrounds, and I would like, I didn't plan for it to write things down, so I would just like find a piece of paper and scribble everything I could. And
Hmm.
now I have a folder where I just keep everything that has to do with Aladdin just in a folder, so that
My
uh,
friend, the digital age is now. Scan, like Genius scan PDF, upload. You can
oh,
organize subfolders. Come on.
trust me, I've got that too. Well, I'm not super organized, but I have this one note on an app where, like, I would have bullet points or numbered points
Yeah.
about whatever it may be, like a contention in Islam, or a thought that I had about Islam, or a problematic hadith, and I would try to keep the source there as well, so I can just search into it. And the list at some point was 200 points long,
Okay.
200 points long. But
Hmm.
yeah, this was
So,
me
so
just like,
basically, an elementary level exploration then.
yeah, just the surface level. I didn't think
Yeah,
too hard
tip of the
about it.
iceberg.
I just wanted to drink, and I was looking for excuses. Is how I
Yeah,
put
exactly. You
it.
wanted to go with all the Xena all over the place. I know, I
Yeah,
know.
yeah. Just worshiping my desires, as they put it.
You got
Um,
it.
so just like I'm scribbling things down now, except now
Hmm.
it's even less organized, and I'm just like crossing things out as we speak and so
Yeah.
on. I did that with some of the conversations with sheikhs, and I I put them aside at the time. I wasn't writing them down to be like, "Hey, I'm gonna corner him about this." I was very passive in most of these conversations. They
Hmm.
wouldn't let me, like, they would just go on tangents very, very often. All of a
Hmm.
sudden, they'd be talking about, even for example, I wouldn't mention Aisha, but then they would bring up Aisha as preemptively, right? Even though the
Yeah.
question is about something else, they're like, "Oh, it's all coming from the same source. People, Islamophobes, or people are trying to, stab into Islam." And
Hmm.
I'm a Muslim to them. I'm a Muslim asking a question about something. And then I would read the papers later. I think I came across them months later, even a week later, because I don't remember everything that went down. I'm like, that's did he seriously talk about that?
Yeah.
There's so much weird whataboutism, and did you face anything? Can you tell me more about that 45-minute conversation aside from the
Yeah.
LGBT point? Was there anything
Yeah.
else that stood out to you?
Oh, I kept my notes and I have them here because there were indeed some things that stood out. So I had written myself an outline of the stuff I wanted to ask him, but a lot of the questions ended up taking longer than I anticipated. In addition, I was realizing quite quickly that the answers were not going to satisfy me, so I kind of edited and, we
Mhm.
went over before what I did talk about and what I chose to just not even bring up. But I'd written myself a bold-faced, underlined note at the top, like in the header and in the footer, so that wherever I scrolled, I would be able to see it and like make sure I was going to the right kind of depth, that says don't accept apologies, excuses, or minimizations. So the first thing we talked about was gender inequality. So one man is worth two women's testimony, or inheritance law, etc., and it's not holding up with modern society. So I don't remember exactly how I asked the question, but his answer I summarized in the following way. Being married might give a woman the chance to answer her material needs. So, gold digging. It's not to demean women, but to be equitable. No, we don't understand the rationalization, but we must assume that God is not unjust. Okay, the second half of that, we must assume God is not unjust. That's compatible with what I believe. We don't understand the rationalization. Yeah, but I don't love it. There are many cultural and traditional aspects of Muslim societies that taint Islam and come into play. The practice of Islam as well may exaggerate the inequality or even trespass on people's rights. So that's something that's problematic. And if that's the case, then what are you going to do about it? Not you personally, the guy I was talking to, but what are we going to do if this is not being addressed? He said that the reward is equal towards men and women in the eyes of God. It's something we've been grappling with throughout generations. Societies already favor men over women, but that's outside the bounds of Islam. Again, so what are you going to do about it? Just, okay, that's fine. No, thank you. And it says, we follow the rules not because we feel women are lesser, but that they are different in their needs and their roles. They still have rights.
That's, a big non-answer, basically.
Yep.
I want to comment on something you said. One of
Mm-hmm.
your footnotes, I guess, which was don't accept apologies or excuses or
Yeah.
I don't know what the other word that you said.
Minimizations.
Minimizations.
Yeah.
So that to reiterate, that was the call that you had after you and I had our first conversation.
Yep. About a week
Was
later.
that your attitude ever speaking to the sheikhs before, faintly or
Let
otherwise?
me think. Yes and no. When there were things that would come up, for example, between me and my ex, where there was something where he was trying to convince me that he knew information about a topic that I had already looked into, and I knew that he was having cultural influence or superstitious influence. That's something where I would actively try to, bring up proof and say, this is what is written. Like, this scholar says this text says this. But for the most part, in other things, there was just a lot of trying to learn. It was already where it was something I felt fairly educated on, where I would, I don't want to say come back harder, but where I would be more persistent, I think is the right word to say.
So you've always had that persistent attitude, you think?
I have been described as extra, if you know that term.
Yeah. Yeah, just like guac, you're extra.
Yeah.
What was I thinking about? Yeah, for those who don't get the joke, in North America, I believe they charge you extra for guac
Yeah.
when you go to a
Which
Mexican place.
that should be illegal. Come on.
Yeah, it's just part of it. You said something else that I want to ask about. You said in your conversations with your ex, I'm presuming things about Islam. You knew he had cultural and superficial,
Superstitious.
superstitious influence.
Yep.
Two different like questions here. So, do you now think that you were quoting, like you said, the blogs and the things that did reinforce your view of Islam, or do you actually think on top of that he did have cultural bias? Like, was he right about that and it wasn't cultural bias?
I'd have to think of a specific example. Let me think. Oh, you're going to make me undo all the closure I've come to, aren't you?
I'm sorry.
It's okay. Let's see. I'm just trying to remember one of the topics that would come up.
It doesn't have to be at the moment.
Oh no, I know one of them.
Okay.
So one of the things that we had discussed several times, him and me, was about the balance of roles inside the house. Because at the time that this was a conversation, I was working full time, more than full time, and he was a master's candidate in a university. So he had some classes and some homework, but he was at home most of the time. And so I was saying, I need you to pick up the slack on some of the cleaning stuff and like getting the groceries. And there
Were you
were other.
working at the time?
I was working more than a full time job.
Okay.
And I was the only income earner, and we were also sending money to his family and paying for school and the living expenses and saving for the future from a single income. So I was a little busy and a little stressed, and he also was busy and stressed with school, but the number of hours we were putting in was not comparable. And so it's not that I was trying to like make it equal and, make him document his timesheet, but just saying, you have more time than I do, and I need you to help out more. So he'd been raised in a certain way in the, you know, North African, Middle Eastern region. And while he was more mm, internationally minded and not so set in the local ways per se, there were still things where we disagreed. And he was trying to quote me things and say, well, this says that you are responsible for the home and I'm responsible for earning. And I said, but who's earning? So
Yeah.
we need to fix this. Like, I'm not trying to punish you. I'm not trying to control you, but I don't have the time and energy to take care of this. I'm not here. So that was one of them where he would kind of bring up stuff and try to tell me what I needed to do. And I said, well, I don't want to put it in terms of money because I'm not a materialistic person. But if this is the way you want to phrase it, here's my counterpoint.
You know what? It's not easy to say whether he was like, I don't think he was necessarily correct in terms of even an Islamic context, because it's very, like in my case, for example, again, I mentioned my family is religious, but they're not
Hmm.
extremists. And my
Yeah.
mother has always worked, and so
Hmm.
has my father, and she's very educated.
Yeah.
So I don't come from a family where she was forced into a certain role or anything.
Hmm.
She still, obviously, she was still the one who was taking care of the house at the same time,
Yeah.
right? Which invalidates the whole verse about men are caretakers of women, because
Hmm.
there's this idea. I'm going to go on that tangent in a little bit about women and money. You touched
Yeah.
on that for a second, but to get back to my point, so he could justify some things based on some verses or hadiths, but he's also kind of wrong because he's not fulfilling his duty as
Hmm.
a husband in Islam.
Hmm.
So it is a gray area about whether he was unfairly quoting Islam or not. It's
Hmm.
did he have that room for interpretation because of Islam, or because of culture already gave him the idea that this is what you're supposed to be doing, and then he justified it with Islam. So I
Yeah.
will
No.
concede that one. It seems kind of up in the air.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and I wanted to talk about the women's role and money that you were talking about that
Sure.
earlier.
Hmm.
So in verse 434, it's the same verse about the wife beating, but
Yep.
in the beginning of it, it says men are. The word actually means men are dominant over women, but there
Hmm.
are some interpretations that say caretakers of women,
Yep.
which I'm
Protectors,
gonna
maintainers, etc. Yeah.
yeah, all that stuff. I'm
Hmm.
gonna address that second definition. I'm just gonna leave the dominance aside, um,
Okay.
because it still does imply dominance, right?
Hmm.
You're not the caretaker. I mean, I guess in the other sense, if you're the caretaker of your parents when they're old, you're not dominant over them. But in most contexts, you're dominant over your child. For example, you're the caretaker of the child. It's
Hmm.
kind of infantilizing. It implies that the person needs someone to take care of them, and it's not a symbiotic kind of back and forth. It's more like they are more in need of that care. So a
Hmm.
child, for example, they care for you as a parent when even when you're not too old,
Yeah.
and there's shared love, but you're still the one, supplying the support and the caregiving and so on, because they are inferior to you in a sense. It's
Hmm.
not that they're worthless, but you know what I mean. They're not on the same level of what's the word I'm looking for? They're not an adult. They don't have the same sense of agency,
Yeah.
control over their life. So when they say caretakers of women, for example, from my experience, like I was saying, my mother was not forced into any role. She was as much of a caretaker as my dad, if not more, because she was also
Hmm.
handling, and that's not because my dad is like a deadbeat dad or anything. He was also always present. But
Hmm.
my mother, because of cultural and religious roles, she was also taking care of the house in many ways. And she was also more involved, as mothers usually are. They're more involved in raising the kids, especially since the beginning, since, they give birth to them, and going forward, even in the most progressive families, it's usually like more heavily towards the mother. So when a verse like that says men are caretakers of women, it is very infantilizing, because it's often the women who are caretakers of the family in a sense, and that's not
Hmm.
mentioned. So the counter to that is that, well, God says heaven is under the feet of the women, or the prophet says. And I've actually heard that this hadith is weak. There's a lot of weak hadiths that Muslims quote because they're nice,
Hmm.
but it doesn't negate the previous one, because not everyone's going to be a mother. And also, what does that say about their treatment here? It doesn't just cancel out. But with the point I was getting at here, I know you've written down some things, and I know you're going to talk about that. Um, wait, I'll let you go first before I get to the money part. So go ahead.
Well, no, I was just gonna, when you were talking about, weak hadith versus ones that are brought up to put things in a better light. It was another thing that I talked with the imam about, talking about contradictions as well. And when I said to him initially,
I'm just going to keep that here for a second. Yeah.
oh, for a second, okay, got you.
Yeah.
When I brought up to him, like, what about these contradictions between different hadith? What about the ones that contradict the Quran? Like, why should we accept this? He said he was unaware of any true contradictions. And I said, whoa. So I brought up one particular website and said, how about this? How about this? How about this? And he went into a very lengthy explanation that the summary was, many hadith were applicable to very specific situations rather than a general rule, and were not meant to modify the Quran, but perhaps expand on it or clarify it. But my reaction to that is, if that's the case, then why is that not made clear in the hadith themselves, saying this is only for this situation, or this is a follow-up, not this is instead of? How are we supposed to know what to follow, when, and how if it's so vague? Which comes back to that bigger picture question that I was talking about earlier.
I think about, yeah. So do you remember what that point was? The one
Oh, I can open it
contradiction?
up. Yeah, there
Yeah.
was one in particular. Let me just open it up. Hold on.
By the way, I haven't been paying too much attention to the comments all the time. I
Mhm,
do not have any moderators except myself. So if someone is, I haven't seen any comment that necessarily warrants someone being muted or removed. So uh, I'm talking to the chat here. If you notice anything, please let me know. But otherwise, I don't mind, for example, Muslims saying, hey, Islam is the truth, and arguing for it in the comments, as long as they're not spamming, you do you, even though you're wrong, or if I think you're wrong. Anyway,
mhm.
did you find that point?
There was one of them I found. There were a few that he and I discussed, and I was just trying to find one that I remembered, talking about. There's one I had. This is from Bukhari, where it says, basically something that legitimizes temporary marriage, which for the majority of Muslims is not something that is actually allowed or accepted, and apparently contradicts the Quran. So, how is this going to happen? And I know a lot of people say, oh, well, that one's a weak one, or that one's been disproven. So why is it still there then?
Was it a weak hadith?
He didn't say. I had brought up a number of them, and he kind of summarized
Hmm.
about how this comes to pass.
Okay.
And yeah, it didn't really address the points. It was more of a don't worry about it kind of thing.
Yeah. If it contradicts the Quran, we don't take it. But
Hmm.
not everybody would think that it contradicts the Quran, because everyone would, use a different verse to justify or negate it.
Hmm.
Um, but I see people often asking me to ask you, or ask someone I'm talking to, or just talk about these topics, and it hasn't been on my radar because it does happen. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it's one of those things that most Muslims don't believe in. It's not
Hmm.
really as consequential as a lot of other beliefs. And I honestly, I haven't looked too deep into it, because even as a Muslim, I just ignored that kind of thing. I was like, nah, 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 that's just a weak, or contradicts the Quran, or whatever.
Yeah.
So I did that. Yeah. So to get to the point about money, women and money.
Okay.
So Asri says that was in the past, where women can't make money. And that brings me to the point in the verse where it says, الرجال قوامون على النساء بما I think it was بما أنفقوا من أموالهم, something like that. Don't quote me right now, but
Well, I couldn't anyway
basically,
because my Arabic's horrible.
because I know someone's probably going to take that segment and be like, he doesn't even know Quran. Um, but yeah, it's been years, man. The part of that verse, it says they're caretakers of women, or dominant over women, because of the money they spent on them. And the
Oh yeah.
it's talking about the dowry or the mahar or whatever they spend on them in their marriage because they're earning money,
Hmm.
and and the logic is because women couldn't earn money, right? So that was they're forced to be in that position. So they're doing the best with what they had. Like it's the prophet is doing the best with what's currently around, and that
Hmm.
puts it in a very restricted time period where, okay, well, we need an update then because women are working now and they want to be. It's not just that
Hmm.
things are worse, so women are forced to work. Women do want to work because a lot of them
Hmm.
feel like they're unfulfilled just sitting at home, even if their husband
Yeah.
is rich.
Yeah.
And it's kind of money is held over their heads in a
Hmm.
sense because
Yeah.
it does put you in a subservient position if you absolutely need the husband to to care for you or to provide for you. And
Hmm.
then that makes it harder to leave a marriage, for example, because what are you going to do? You have no skills. Women can't make money. And I'm not talking just about that time. If a woman is in that position today, she's more trapped in that marriage. And that's why
Hmm.
people always say there's fewer divorces in Muslim countries. Well, that's for reasons of people,
Yep.
even Christians, they kind of feel the need to keep the marriage together because that pleases God in a sense. I'm
Hmm.
sure same thing in Judaism as well. Do you have any thoughts about that? The money and women part.
I mean, I moved out of my parents' house when I was 17. I went to university, and so I was used to taking care of everything on my own for a really long time. So it was a bit of an adjustment to be living full time with somebody when I did get married. And it was an adjustment for him to not live in his parents' house because for those who don't know, a lot of times in families in like Muslim majority areas, you stay with your parents till you get married, even sometimes afterwards. But we both had to kind of find how we were going to work things out. But it was tricky because I had a lot more world experience. I'd already lived in other countries. I'd been out of the house for a long time. I had kind of my groove. So I had to open up my mentality a little bit to allow somebody else to come into my routines and adjust what I was doing to make it um, compatible for two people rather than one. But at the same time, he had to adjust his expectations because we had discussed this kind of thing. How is life going to look exactly? And he said, "Oh, I'm willing to do this. I'll help you with this. I'll help you with this." And at one point I said, "What do you mean help me with? Like, it's not my job for you to pick up the pieces of it. It's our responsibility." And I don't think he ever really kind of understood what I meant by that, which, okay, that's fine. But it showed in the actions as well. And it was sometimes the talks about money were really weird because, as I said, our income, my income, but our income was split several ways. And I would come home and not only find that things hadn't been done, but also find that he'd gone out to eat or done this or done that. So you had the time, but instead you went and spent this money that we really don't have. And it was tricky because before that, his part-time income when he was living at home had gone somewhat towards the family, but otherwise towards just whatever he wanted. Going and hanging out with a friend or gassing up his motorbike. And I think it was the first time he had to be fully financially responsible without a lot of extra wiggle room. His family weren't well off by any means, but there still wasn't the same level of um, paying attention to where everything went all the time. So eh, I'm getting off topic. I know I'm not actually answering your question, but it was complicated, is the quick answer.
Okay. I know some people are going to be like, "Oh, so you left Islam because you had a bad husband,"
No,
right?
I was still in Islam for
Yeah.
a year and a half. No, more than 2 years after he left. More than a year and a half after the divorce was finalized. And I've been questions about that too, because a lot of people assume, for good reason, because it is a fairly common story, but a lot of people assume I converted for him. I was already investigating this before I even knew he existed, and I stayed in for quite a while after we broke up. So yeah, not related.
So did that marriage affect how you see Islam in any way?
Not necessarily. I think there was just a lot more um, information about where some of these viewpoints that I don't necessarily agree with come from. Meeting somebody who not only grew up in the religion, but in a country where it's the predominant viewpoint, where a lot of the laws are influenced by it. So it just kind of was a different way to think about it, but it didn't necessarily greatly influenced the way that I went about things. There were a couple things I may have adjusted out of respect to him. Just, I'd rather not have you doing this type of thing in public. But that was out of a respect. It wasn't because it's something that I feel I needed to do for myself, if that makes sense. But yeah, it was just new information, new input.
Okay. Something I want to mention. Thank you, Miho Kurtzi, for the super chat.
Ooh,
And I don't even know what currency this is or how much, but thank you,
SEK.
whatever
Hold
it
on,
is.
hold on. SEK
You're gonna figure it out.
20.0. What kind of currency you want it in?
I don't know.
We'll do
I
US
think
dollars. That's
US dollars
pretty.
is what most people know.
$2.19. It's
Thank you,
from
though.
the Swedish krona. Ooh.
Oh, well, thank you for that. And I want to mention to people, if you do want to like give me super chats or whatever, please make sure that you also donate the same amount. I put this in my Patreon as well. Donate the same amount somewhere else to, another cause that more like it's not that I don't think I'm doing well, but another cause that also deals more directly with a lot of humanitarian issues. So just a reminder for those people. Yeah. I've been seeing this comment. Please don't spam, but I do want to address this again. You, an atheist, follow man-made laws. I, a Muslim, follow laws from God. It's interesting to me because in their mind they see this as like it's a default win because God does exist and I'm following what God said. So why everything you're saying is irrelevant because there's this authority that anything God orders is good or forced, right? Like it is what it is. What do you think? What did you think as a Muslim? What do you think now?
Um, I think the best way I can summarize it is with two short things. The first is I've already said I think everyone has innate ethics and morality anyway. But there was a video, I'm pretty sure it was yours, where you were debating with some guy who's into the circular logic, and it was something to do with like bestiality. Do you know what I'm about to get at?
Oh yeah.
And I'm pretty sure you asked him, well, then why don't you have relations with a donkey? And he said, because God said not to. And you're like, so if he didn't say, you would go ahead and do it? Like, okay, that doesn't really add up. So, when people are saying, oh, I follow the laws from God, therefore they're better, you follow them as you understand them. I'm also following laws and ethics as I understand them. And there's a pretty clear right and wrong for a lot of things. And, the things where there's a gray area, you have to examine it and make your best decision and then fix it if you were wrong.
Okay. Actually, I completely forgot about this thing that you said earlier. So you said your ex had cultural influence and superstitious influence.
Yeah.
What was superstitious influence to you because you were also a Muslim?
Um, let's see. If you stand in front of a fan, not even an AC, well, also an air conditioner, but a fan, when you have just come out of the shower, or if you have wet hair, you will get sick. Um, what else? Women shouldn't sit on a bare stone floor or concrete floor because they will get sick. It'll impact their reproductive organs and make them have problems. Um, what else? Those came up a lot, and at one point I was being a bit passive aggressive, and I would do these things deliberately just to get a reaction because I just thought they were so ridiculous. But then I realized that wasn't really the right thing to do.
No.
Um,
By the way,
what else?
people are still
Yeah.
asking, is she a Muslima or did she leave? And someone is saying she's a. I wouldn't answer this question, interrupt you, except that someone's
Go ahead.
saying she's a modern reformer, I think. No, just to clarify, like in the beginning of the stream, she mentioned how she is leaving Islam. Would you say you are leaving or you left Islam? How would you phrase it?
Um, I think religiously, mentally, I have left. I have notified people, friends and family, as well as a few still Muslims that I'm close to, and it's gone without incident, which is nice. Clearly I'm still in some degree. This is a process, and I'm just figuring out where I feel comfortable. But yeah, I wouldn't feel comfortable attending some sort of Muslim event or anything like that at this point.
Oh, I want to expand on that before going back to the superstitions
Okay.
and the super chat. So much is going on.
Mhm.
So, what would make you not comfortable in that setting?
It would feel disingenuous.
Okay. You would feel like a hypocrite?
Not a hypocrite. I just wouldn't feel that I was there, um, like legitimately.
So you
I'm
mean
thinking,
with
for
them
example, going
knowing?
to a Friday service.
Okay.
No, for myself. I don't really
I mean,
put a
in
lot of
that
stock into what
situation,
other
they don't
people think.
know about your apostasy? Like, what is the
Doesn't matter.
situation? Okay.
Either way, it
What?
doesn't matter.
Okay.
Um, no, I'm not really. I don't concern myself at this point too much with with what other people think, because there's so much else to worry about, and I could drive myself insane. I have driven myself insane with these questions, but no, for myself, I would feel like I was in the wrong place. It's not like I feel like I'm barred from entering a mosque or anything. As long as I observe the right level of dress and respect while there, I can be there. But to attend a service or some sort of event function, I don't think it's the right thing to do. I think I would question my motivation for doing that.
Fair enough. Yeah. I know a lot of ex-Muslims are, I don't know, questioning Muslims would feel guilty for other reasons, like
Hmm.
they cannot, like they're pretending, right? Because they can't tell people that they're not Muslim anymore. So
Hmm.
I think in many ways, and this is not to point fingers, but you have some kind of luxury of being able to just walk into the mosque and your, previous community and say, "Hey, I went back to not being a Muslim anymore,"
Hmm.
and obviously you're going to receive backlash, right? And you know this, but
Hmm.
you have that option. And I think a lot
Yeah.
of people, they don't. So I was coming at it
Hmm.
from that angle. That's why I asked, and did you tell them or not in that scenario? Because it makes a difference. Because the way that you're seeing it is different than what I was thinking, right?
So I haven't been back in a scenario where I would need to be face to face and tell somebody like, "Hey, guess what?" But the first person I told was my mom, and then she told my sister. A couple days later, I told my brother and his wife.
And
Um,
none of those people are Muslim, right?
Correct. My
Okay.
brother's Christian now, but we all grew up atheist, and the rest of my family, to my knowledge, still is. I told a few people at work, especially those who asked about why I was, presenting myself differently. But a short version, I said, I'm willing to discuss the long version with you, but I don't want to overwhelm you with information. So the short version is this. And some of them asked me more questions. Some of them just said, okay, thanks for telling me. But then I held off on telling any of my Muslim friends because it's not that I was afraid of their reaction, because I would like to think I know them well enough and that I've made the right choices in who I choose to be friends with, that it wouldn't be an issue. But it still was just kind of, it was scary, honestly. What if I'm wrong? What if they do have a problem with this? What if we can't interact anymore? But luckily, the 3 or 4 people who I did choose to tell all said essentially the same thing, which was, this doesn't change who either of us are as a person. We can still be friends. Let's stay in touch, please. One of them did say, would you consider delaying your decision for a few weeks? And I explained why not. And I said, sorry, but I can't. But, still
Is that
the
even an
reaction.
option? Like in your mind, you can't force yourself to think that you're still a Muslim, right?
Um,
Or you mean just a label and I don't
I
know.
don't know. I didn't really ask for a clarification because regardless of what the answer would have been, whether it was the label or the decision itself, this was still going to be the same answer, which is no. But they still accepted it and said, okay, I understand. So yeah, as you said, it is a luxury. It absolutely is, because there's laws in other countries where I would be in serious danger. Luckily for me, I don't live there.
Yeah. No, I didn't say this to kind of like guilt you for that
I
privilege or
don't feel
anything.
guilty. It's the
Uh,
fact.
yeah, it is what it is. And I was actually even thinking aside from these situations, because even if the country itself doesn't persecute that person, the communities are a lot harsher in those countries, and to the point of even maybe physical harm, maybe just
Hmm.
complete mental destruction of the person. Um, I noticed that the reaction, the same people you have told about leaving Islam, I don't know them, but I would
Hmm.
bet that at least one of them would have a different reaction if I were, an acquaintance of theirs and I said the
Yep.
same thing.
I think
Because,
you're right.
I mean, they would see it as, okay, I get your biases because you were raised not Muslim, and I get why you're not you kind of may not be attached to it at this point, or why you might want to pull away. But in
Hmm.
my case, they would look at it as the truth.
Hmm.
You're knowing, like you're doing this on purpose.
Hmm.
I'm way worse of an apostate than an ex-convert, I suppose. And
Hmm.
I don't know. That's just what I'm picking up from what I'm hearing is happening to converts. Obviously, some of them have very, very negative reactions towards ex-converts as well. But the trend is usually a lot softer. I feel
Yeah.
like they know they're being watched by outsiders, but when it's within the community, like ex-Muslims and Muslims, they get away with it so easily. And this is me just going on a bit of a rant, but I feel like we're invisible. Ex-Muslims like myself, especially ones raised in it or closer to whatever ethnicity their community is, or something along those lines, where like it's all kept in the family. It's kind of like family drama, and no one wants to intervene. But if it were an ex-convert and Muslims were treating them harshly, it would make more of a stink, if that makes sense, right? I
It does. I think there's an analogy that came up in my mind while you're saying this, which is the difference between a green card holder or permanent resident going through the time and expense to migrate to this new country, and set up everything, their banking and healthcare and a job and all this stuff, and then deciding to go back home, which seems like an easy choice. But I can tell you from being somebody who has repatriated, it's overwhelming to suddenly be surrounded by English input all the time, not to mention all the other things that come with reverse culture shock, versus a born citizen who eventually decides to move abroad and renounce their citizenship, which is also a lengthy and expensive process. There's going to be questions all around in both situations, but one is going to hit a little closer to home for people who, see somebody decide to leave their home country forever and give up citizenship. Do you think it tracks?
It does, but you talking about that made me think of another point,
Hmm.
renouncing citizenship. So when you renounce a citizenship, it could be for legal reasons because you gain some benefits from having only the other one, or
Hmm.
some technical reason like that. It could be for some kind of ideological difference, like
Hmm.
if you concluded my country is just so evil, or the government of my country is just so bad, I don't want to be
Hmm.
associated with it.
Yep.
Whatever, there are a lot of different motivations for that, but it's complicated when it comes to leaving Islam as someone who was raised in it, because some want to completely disassociate from that identity, as in kind of renounce their citizenship in a sense, and that's
Hmm.
why people see it as treason. But I feel like a lot more don't want to completely separate from the community, or just completely
Hmm.
separate from that part of the world, but they're forced to, or they feel like it's more natural to do that, because why would I want to be in a community that doesn't want me and demonizes me, and so on.
Hmm.
And I understand both points of view, because I'm starting to feel this more and more. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm very civil with Muslims, especially in real life, especially when they don't know. I'm always nervous, aside from them figuring out that I'm Aladdin. Even before that, I was nervous that Islam would come up, because the default is they presume that I'm Muslim, right? Because I look just like them, I have a Muslim name, um, and they presume that I'm one of them. So the Islam is just in every conversation. It's not necessarily that they're going to be like, "Did you like? Let's discuss Islam," but it would be more like a casual mention of "Let's go pray," or this or that, and I would have a choice of either playing along, which makes me feel like a hypocrite, like you were saying
Hmm.
earlier. Well, not hypocrite, you were saying felt not genuine.
Yeah,
And
disingenuous. Yeah.
yeah, I would feel that way, but on the other end, I don't want to turn this into a situation, not because I'm turning this into a situation, but merely saying, yeah, I'm not religious anymore. That could make them look at me very differently. Like suddenly even if they're not hostile, they just don't consider me the same person I was before. Um, it could turn even worse. Like, it could mean social consequences for me. Like, the whole group would shun me, for example, not necessarily outright, but just I would just stop seeing those people. It could be even worse. Like, people try to tattletale.
Hmm.
It could be that they try to convince you to come back, and just be like, okay, so tell me what is wrong with Islam, and then it turns into a debate about Islam that I've never signed up for.
Yeah.
Um, and so I understand. And on top of that, oh, just to comment on the comment that I highlighted, yeah, they often try to make you feel guilty for, betraying your people, or your parents, or that kind of thing, and they put it as renouncing your citizenship. And that's why I wanted to comment on that, because I don't think that analogy on its own is adequate,
Okay.
because it does imply some level of treason, as they put it, or not being loyal to the group. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. Is it bad to not be loyal to a group because you don't think the group is doing the right thing? I mean, blind loyalty is not necessarily a virtue. Like a lot
Right.
of people, I don't mean to make that as a one-to-one comparison, but look at Germany back at a time when it was very problematic. A lot of people were allies and just part of loyal to the group. Does that mean that even if they're in the minority, the people who leave, does that mean that they're wrong just because they're in the minority? And it's unfortunate that this is the line it goes down. But I was gonna say personally, I am starting to feel that disconnect more and more and more with my call it my previous community with Muslims. Even if Islam is not in the picture, just knowing the things that many of them justify in in a broader sense. For example, we've spoken about homophobia earlier, or when someone makes a justification. You mentioned this to me in the last email.
Hmm.
People justifying the death penalty, for example, for
Yeah.
apostasy or
Hmm.
blasphemy, and there is an event about that we might talk about.
Right.
Um, when a person says that, even if they're not saying you should be executed or whatever, you just can't be in the same community with them. You can't feel like you're part of them anymore. So that's why a lot of ex-Muslims would kind of so-called renounce that citizenship from the whole community.
Right.
And it's just reinforced by how the default position is for us.
Hmm.
So that's what I had to say about that. And I know you have some comments. I can see you writing.
Oh, it was about something else. It's a question I want to ask you later. It's not related to this. It's just something that came to mind randomly. I'll save it for appropriate
Okay.
time.
So Zagros, thank you for the super chat. And he was asking, what does Rachel think about FGM? We did talk about this earlier. I just wanted to mention it so that I answer him. We did talk about it earlier, and obviously she does not agree with
Yeah,
it.
it's an atrocity. It should not be tolerated in any form.
Yeah. Um, and sometimes I think these questions are interesting and I know they seem kind of offensive sometimes to ask, but not necessarily FGM is what I'm thinking about. But some of these questions that may seem offensive to ask are sometimes justified to ask because you don't know
Yeah.
what the other person is really thinking. And
Hmm.
you'd be surprised the things that moderates just believe, even if passively, right?
Yeah. Well, like I
Um,
said, even Muslim men that I met who seemed to be fairly progressive, liberal, etc. I never met one in my circles who wasn't at least tacitly anti-LGBT, which it's 2021. Like, come on.
yeah, that's a very it's a weird topic because people ask me to debate about LGBT rights. I'm like, what is there to debate? There's
Yeah,
this
they
word often
exist.
comes up. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's the default position is that it's none of your goddamn business.
Hmm.
You haven't proven. Again, this is like the burden of proof thing. Just because your book says it's bad, you haven't proven that it's bad for society. There are
Hmm.
things that are bad for society, and we can have discussions about drugs and legalizing drugs and a bunch of different ethical topics that are for the greater good or harm of the society. But if you haven't already established that this is a harmful thing, no one is forced to debate you on it.
Right.
You're the outlier. And I'm trying to get people to understand that because the word debate often comes up. Like, have you seen that when you were looking up your questions about Islam?
Yeah, but I think what you might not be um, recognizing is that a lot of those people do feel that they've proved it. It's just that you don't necessarily accept their evidence as absolute or legitimate,
Hmm.
which is a tough place to come from because um, if somebody is in a version of reality where you don't live, their opinion is still valid, and it's fine to disagree. Like there's nothing wrong with that, but it's hard to have a healthy debate if you guys don't have the same factual basis or the same universe that you live in to begin with.
Hmm. Yeah, like what is there to debate if we don't agree on the reality of like someone, for example, I don't know if you've heard of Daniel Hakikachu. He's a
Oh
Dawa
yeah,
person. What a stain on humanity that person is. Um, even like as a Muslim, I would hate that kind of person.
and
And
I did.
and you did. There, he has a lot of followers though. Like the amount of people that follow this kind of rhetoric, people seem
Mhm.
to minimize it as oh bad Muslims or that's not real Islam, but never seems to address the fact that they exist and it's being perpetuated under the same text and everything. But someone like that, people always tell me you're too chicken, for example, to debate Daniel Hakikachu, and I'm like, debate what? Like
There's no
debate
point.
And not just there's no point. I'm not my position, for example, on not to beat women doesn't need
Mhm.
to be debated. Like if he's asserting that Allah is saying like he's not making apologetics, he's saying yes, Allah is saying yes, and there's this situation for it, and it is justified. I'm not going to go and argue with someone with a position so outlandish that the only
Mhm.
people who follow it are that kind of person.
Yep.
So yeah, people need to understand that these conversations are a lot more constructive than debates when it comes to a lot of different topics about religion
Yeah.
and others.
I see it the same as I know there's, and I do not want to get into political discussion, so this is going to be quick, and please do not follow up. But
Mhm.
I see it the same as the past election in the U.S., which there are plenty of people who were and are Trump supporters for various reasons, economical reasons, wanting to shake up the system, etc. And okay, but the ones who were with him because they agreed with his bigotry and felt enabled to be more public with these views, that's where I have an issue. And that's the people who I just don't have any desire to interact with because we're so worlds apart. We are not going to find a common ground.
Yep. There's a super chat I want to mention, and then I want to go
Ooh,
back
what
to
we
this
got?
same topic. Uh, Hasan Allan, sorry for off topic, but how do you, uh, how don't you have an Arabic accent when you grew up there? How come you sound so Western? So I get asked this a lot, and I'll repeat the answer a lot. So I don't know. I feel weird saying the same thing often, but that happens on live streams. You can still tell sometimes the way that I pronounce things or the way that I don't know, mumble or I lose words sometimes. But it started off first of all because the school that I went to, as did so many people in Saudi Arabia where I grew up, everything was taught in English. So the teachers still had accents. Everybody had an Arabic accent, but at least we were all like learning science and math and everything in English except for Arabic
Mm-hmm.
class and religion class, which all schools, even private schools, had religion class. And religion meaning Islam, not any
Mm-hmm.
other religion. But it was called religion class, which is now it makes me think it was just a default. Okay, religion class is Islam. Well, what are you talking about? Um, like the other religions didn't even exist in our minds. Anyway, and so I knew English that way, and I was very interested in learning, like improving my vocabulary for exams, so I can go to a better university as well. But I picked up this accent from movies and from people who had teachers with like actual American or North American or British whatever teachers, and I just picked up some of their accents. So that's why I sound like this. And people usually presume that I was born in the West or something. And
There's that
no,
word again.
the West, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there was a comment down here. Let me find it real quick. Uh, Someone saying he kind of has an accent. Yeah, you're right. And yeah, so it was about the previous topic about Daniel Hakikachu and the LGBT and things like that. And he said, or like beating women is what we're talking about, or lightly, gently, whatever. But apostate, you have to justify why it's outlandish, and that's exactly what
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about. You have to justify why it isn't, because
Yeah.
common sense, innate morality, whatever fitra, even if you want to call it that, from coming from
Mm-hmm.
a Muslim perspective, um, according to laws, according to everything, it is not good. So you have to justify why it's bad. So the burden of proof is something you need to keep in mind. Did you ever start to give in to certain things that were against your innate morality?
I don't think I would say I gave in necessarily, but more just examined, is there evidence for this? Is there a basis for this? Is it something that I might need to consider a bit more? Um, but for any issues where I did change my approach, again, it was out of respect for my ex at the time, to make him comfortable, and they were small things just to keep the peace a bit. Usually, it was stuff when we were in his country because I wanted to adapt to the local mindset and customs. Because who am I to go stomp in and bring my ideals to somebody else's country? But for the rest of the stuff, usually it was all, I would say all were basically, yeah, I'm not gonna go with this.
Yeah. Well, in a sense, I guess you were entertaining it to be thorough. I mean, the first
Yeah,
things that you said,
yeah, that's a
because
good way to say it.
yeah, yeah, that's what I did too. I didn't always just simply dismiss things. At first, I
Hmm.
did and say that's not real Islam and so on and so forth. But then
Hmm.
I was thinking, okay, let's see what God meant to say. Let's see what the scholars who interpreted it, not just the ones with the bad interpretations, but the majority. What do they say? Um, and I know a lot of Muslims don't like to put emphasis on the majority part, and they say, "Do you just follow the majority blindly?" But I think I told you this in my previous conversation, and I want to get your thoughts on it. Um, if I find a fringe interpretation that is actually progressive or good or less bad,
Mhm.
I can't bring myself to believe that that's what God intended, but the majority of Muslims misunderstood, and the majority of humanity aren't Muslims. So I asked you this before, and you were thinking about it. Did you come to any conclusions? Did it cross your mind?
I don't know that I necessarily came to any conclusions, but this is kind of what I was alluding to earlier.
Mm,
Let me go back up and see.
yeah.
Yeah, it was when you had said, if the message is so misunderstood, and I can't even say whether I was believing or practicing correctly, who knows? But I really disagreed with the way that the vast majority do believe and practice. And if the message is this unclear, then how perfect is the message, and therefore the messenger and the message writer? And that just blew my mind. And that's what brought all this other stuff that I'd been, ignoring to the forefront all at once. And rather than dealing with one or two issues, it was all of them. And that was kind of like, oh, we have a problem here.
Yeah. Okay. I I still have a lot of questions on my list, and it's very interesting to me that I am now looking at the number of people watching, and it's been constant for a while now. It's been
Yeah.
consistent, and that
Mm-hmm.
means that people are really engaged here. They're really interested
Oh,
in
cool.
what you have to say.
Mm-hmm.
This is usually as long as my live streams are, but if you want to keep going, I really don't
Oh, yeah, I'm
mind.
good. I might need
Okay.
a break because I did drink a big tea at the beginning, but I'm good. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Um, Yeah, so many things I still have to ask. So, this is one of the things that you wanted to talk about,
Mm-hmm.
the anxiety that you had
Oh,
immediately after the
yes.
decision
Yes.
and how you dealt with that.
Yeah. So I already have a diagnosed, documented anxiety condition. So this definitely exacerbated it. I had a lot of difficult what if thoughts repeating on high volume in my mind when this was all coming to a head. But I've found in the past that creating simple and practical, immediate solutions is a really good way for me to calm down. And the reason I wanted to talk about this is if there's somebody else who's going through this and who's trying to decide what to do, maybe who's said, I think I'm going to leave Islam, but what now? What happens? Like, there's so much unknown. This was my process. So number one, there was an issue of lacking authentic knowledge. And so my solution was seeking out trusted sources on various sides to engage in dialogue so that my questions could be answered fully and in a detailed way. Um, and, I arrived at my own conclusion based on that. The second one was not wearing hijab anymore, at least not in the same way that I had been, and dealing with the question of the change in appearance from those who know me and the exhaustion of having the same conversation again and again after having been, as I said, the Mughal for several years. That old question, not even water. It's like, yeah, you'd think people would know by now, fastest growing religion, but okay. So my solution for that, I kind of not necessarily prepared, but I thought over how I would address these questions and made like a sample script in my head, basically. And then I deliberately went and told some people that I trusted in strategic areas and gave them complete permission to discuss it with others as well. Because, gossip happens, word gets around. And if they can help fill in some gaps and it's less for me to deal with, that works for me. You can't control how information spreads out. It's like oil and water. So you might as well have some people on your team. The third thing was I work with kids, young kids, and I was trying to think, how am I going to deal with questions from them um, about the type of haircut I have. My hair is really short, like a buzz cut, and it doesn't matter why, but it's been a choice for a number of years now. My solution was I went and got a really cool haircut with like razor designs in it at a place where nobody knows me, so that way I wasn't giving the pressure of addressing the change in appearance. It was just nobody knows what I used to look like, and so they're not going to care. So that way, at the point when I do decide to completely uncover, um, I've got something cool to show them. And the question answering for them is not that difficult. Just the answer is anybody can have whatever haircut they want. So that's an easy one. And then as a form of self-care, I finally got the tattoo I'd been wanting for 7 years. I was already in the
Mhm.
process of booking it because A lot of Quranists, which is where I was right before this decision, don't say that it's prohibited. So I'd already been in the process of finding an artist and discussing getting a consultation. But yeah, this is something I've been wanting for a long time, and finally I got to.
Is it
And
like
then the last,
symbolic for you, I guess? Is it?
very,
Yeah. Okay.
all of them are. The rest of them I had before I converted, but this is my first one since. So yeah, it there's a lot of there's it's like an onion. There's a lot of layers. Um, and then the last thing was just what will people say? So on both sides, this was a concern um, for people who are Muslim and ex-Muslim. But in the end, I realized I've been through this type of worry mindset many times before about other issues that seemed really significant. And I've always found that the people closest to me and the ones that matter don't mind. There's actually a saying, those that matter don't mind, and those that mind don't matter. Many have already been supportive and understanding in my real life as well as online. And in fact, like I said, after telling some of my Muslim friends locally, they all said basically the same thing. Like, it sounds like this has been a tough process, but we're still friends. Don't lose touch. At the same time, a lot of people online had not been very supportive or understanding. And a quick message, I guess, to the Muslims that have already condemned me. Your message is saying that I don't know what I'm talking about when it comes to Islam, or that I'm making up my own Islam, or who are perhaps now in text or in thought threatening my soul, are a perfect example of the mentality that was a big part of why I felt I had to leave. Being so close-minded to others and only accepting the way that you believe and practice is really toxic, and it will absolutely cause others to make the same choice. So please examine your interactions. For the people on the other side who are really angry ex-Muslims who have also already attacked me, I know you must have experienced a lot of hurt due to the way you were forced to practice, but your messages saying things like she needs to open up her eyes and wake up, or she'll learn the truth soon, she's stupid, she doesn't know what she's talking about, it's just as bad. And they don't hurt me personally. Like, that's not the issue, but it makes me nervous for other people who might be questioning Islam, and trying to examine other forms of belief or disbelief, especially for those who are in need of some kind of support, because you're making essentially the opposite yet equally militant and toxic environment that only accepts those who think and believe the same way as you, which is just what you claim to be against. So for both groups, claiming to know the real Islam, either positively or negatively, is just as valid as my previous interpretation and practice, by which I mean it's personal, it's subjective, and it's heavily influenced by your background and experiences. All these are valid viewpoints, but to completely dismiss someone else's view is wrong. Part of the reason I felt comfortable coming on this show with you and asking questions initially as well as today is your neutrality. You're not trying to convince anybody, just have a reasonable and respectful discourse. So everybody else, please take a lesson. Regardless of what your viewpoint might be, practice more kindness and understanding. There's absolutely commenters who were kind and engaging previously, I'm sure now as well, even if we didn't see eye to eye. But the only way forward is going to be to open your mind and accept that different doesn't automatically equal wrong, and stay civil. For those who already embody this mindset, my deepest gratitude to you.
Man, I have a lot to say. Every time you say something, I've got like three things I want to ask you or talk about. Um, so you mentioned how those militant ex-Muslims, as you put it, which
Mm-hmm.
is a term I'm going to start using.
Nice.
I want
Copyright.
to, yeah, thanks for teaching me that.
No
Um,
problem.
I want to remind people that just by virtue of being atheist or ex-Muslim or ex whatever, it doesn't make you a good person or a better person or even more intelligent per se.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and especially like when people behave that way, when they say, we were talking about this earlier, the condescending way of like, oh, you're an apostate, you'll see, like just give it time. It's the same as when sheikhs are like, oh, you were a Muslim before, you're a revert,
Mm-hmm.
or there are other examples as well. Um, but aside from the fact that, so not all ex-Muslims are behaving well, and I hope to like to tell them, I call them out when I see them. Obviously, I
Mm-hmm.
can't just always keep doing that, but I try to do that more often than than I see other people. There are people with followers, and I'm not necessarily singling out ex-Muslims. I'm also talking about a lot of Muslims online.
Mm-hmm.
They don't seem to acknowledge the so-called bad followers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of enables them.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you see people who follow me doing something bad. Sometimes I will call it out, but I can't always be on top of it. But I
Mm-hmm.
try. And something to the Muslims who were, sorry, the ex-Muslims who were acting very arrogantly in the comments in the previous conversation and maybe even in this one, it's not just that your behavior is going to make more questioning Muslims not want to join you or apostatize. If that's what you care about, you're hurting your so-called like goal here. But more importantly, you're causing them more torment. Not necessarily, maybe not you, but I'm saying you could be someone who's questioning, and they see that the other side is horrid, right? And it seems like the Muslims were right, and now they're stuck in between a rock and a hard place because both sides are just piling on them. So you got Muslims saying, like you described earlier. So I just wanted to tell the audience that. And you were talking about Islam is, or your religion is subjective, or your interpretation is personal, and so on.
Hmm.
And again, I want to play devil's advocate, even though I just condemned, the militant ex-Muslims.
Hmm.
I want to play devil's advocate as to what their source of that could be. So aside from, you touched on this, like the trauma that they've gone through because of
Hmm.
people in their lives. I would even say without trauma being inflicted by other bad or micromanaging Muslims, just the religion itself, when you're not even forced to take the harsh interpretation. Sometimes that's the obvious thing, that's the default thing around you, and that's what the words say.
Hmm.
And the internal conflict that it causes, and when someone comes out and says, religion is subjective, and Islam is actually, to me, is so and so, they get a little angry because they're thinking that's not the Islam that exists that exists today. And
Hmm.
I felt that a lot, and I try to control that kind of reaction, because sometimes I feel like it's good PR for Islam when there's a progressive Muslim out there, or someone
Hmm.
who sees Islam as their own personal journey. And it makes me feel like that's not fair, because it kind of cancels out a lot of what we're trying to say, because people would take, someone like you as credible, and someone like us often not credible. So
Okay.
that's where that anger, and that's not me making excuses for those people, but
No, no, not at all. It's good to understand because I hadn't
yeah.
considered that viewpoint. Um,
And maybe
yeah.
they haven't, like that's what I'm saying. Maybe they haven't
Hmm.
thought of it as well. So when I kind of spell it out for them, if that's how you're thinking, yeah, try to curb that. But if you recognize that's where it's coming from, it's easier to curb it, to not act that
Yeah.
way.
Hmm.
Um, and there's a bunch of super chats, and some of them way too generous. So thank you. But I'll
Whoa,
try to
nice.
I'll try to get through them one by one. So, stop scamming, man. I keep seeing you on my channel. Thank you for the support. I'd be interested to know Rachel's thoughts on things in the Quran, like this verse, these verses, where it says heaven almost tears itself apart over the belief God has a son, or its prescription, or yeah, prescription of crucifixion. So I got the verses right here. I don't know if you want to be put on the spot about that. What do you think?
I'm gonna open a book. Hold on, because I need some
Okay.
context. Hold
I'm
on.
gonna pull it up as well, and at the same time, I'll take the next question first.
Okay.
Um, so
17.
thank you so much for the super chat. That is way too generous. Uh,
Whoa, look at that.
yeah.
What
Um, I would like to
was it?
say,
19 what? Sorry,
what's
19
that?
what? The
Yeah,
what I'm supposed to be looking up.
it's 1988
Okay.
to verse 93.
88 to 30. There's 93. Okay, got it.
So I'm gonna address the comment. It says, I would like to say that and as a non-Muslim woman, I was drawn to Islam because of the men. I thought they were more masculine, and there are some women who get a kick out of domineering men. Did your guest ever have this issue? I'm no longer like this, by the way. Yeah,
Nope.
even before you shook your head, I was thinking, no, that's not Rachel. That's not
No.
the
I mean,
vibe I
there's
was getting.
nothing wrong with that. Like,
Mhm,
everyone has a type. Go for it. Not not stereotypes exist for a reason, but they're not always true. And I think once you get on the inside of any group that you're unfamiliar with, you start to notice a lot more of the subtleties, and you start to realize that the grass isn't always greener. And that doesn't just apply here, that applies for anything.
mhm. I'm gonna talk from personal experience here. I
Hmm.
had the issue of being stereotyped as that guy in both a negative and a positive. Well, not positive, but like someone would be like the commenter who is attracted to that kind of stereotype, but then they realize I'm not, and they're disappointed. I'm like, I'm sorry.
That's
I,
funny.
not to say that I'm, subservient in a relationship, but it's less of a domineering role and more of a, give and take kind of thing.
Yeah.
And what she's describing, it could turn like very toxic very quickly.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh yeah.
so yeah,
Oh yeah.
yeah,
Because that's going to be the same guy who takes a lot of the hardline views, isn't it?
yeah. If he doesn't already like have
Yeah.
them. So that's a negative for me because sometimes people presume it and they stay away, and the opposite, like people I don't know, especially like maybe a
Hmm.
potential partner or something, or the opposite, they presume it and they want it, but I don't have it. So that's very
You know what
interesting.
I got to tell you right now? I'm not going to say this wrong because again, my Arabic's terrible, so you can say it right for everybody else. But the rira, you know what I'm talking about?
Jealousy,
Yeah.
yeah,
Protective jealousy is how I was told to define it.
and it's a
I was
good thing,
unaware
right?
of this. Whoa, depends who you ask.
No, I mean like
So,
in Islam, it's touted as a
in a
good
good,
thing, right?
yes, yes.
Yeah.
And as somebody who has been educated on toxic relationships, toxic masculinity, abusive relationships, domestic violence, etc., um, and actually to some degree experienced it, not with my ex, but with somebody much earlier on. Um, it's not something I see as a positive. It is useful to care about others and care about their well-being, but to care about their impact on your image, like really, this was one of the things where I said I changed my behavior to accommodate the local culture and my ex's wishes in certain things. So, for example, the place I was working at the time, I was working with children, but there was me and then native, two citizens of that area, one male, one female, all Muslim, and the kids were not. The kids were from elsewhere. But I was the lead, and they were, I guess, one level below me, hierarchically speaking. So I had to do a lot of administrative things and hold meetings and such. And so me and this guy were often alone together. And it's funny because I was absolutely convinced that he was gay. So these accusations from my ex of trying to spend time alone with him, I was like, one, it's professional, and two, it's really not an issue, trust me. But but he was very adamant that this was inappropriate, and it all came to a head when this guy who was, I think, in his early 20s at the time, and maybe didn't know better, maybe just being friendly to somebody who's new to the area, asked me not to go with him, but made me aware of an event at a local American club, like organization. They were having a movie night or something.
Wait, were you a
Maybe I wanted.
hijabi at the time?
No, I was doing. Let me think. At the time,
Like, did
I
he
think I
know
was
you were
doing
a
similar to
Muslim?
this. Oh yeah, he
Okay.
knew.
Okay.
He didn't invite me to go with him, but he said, "There's this event you might be interested in attending."
Mhm.
And I said, "Hey, X, like, look at this. Are you interested?" And he's like, "Who told you about this?" And I explained it so and so, and he lost it. Like,
Wait, was it something like haram or what was the event
no,
about?
no. The issue was that this guy was texting me
Oh, okay.
about a non-work related thing. And again, he wasn't inviting me to go with him. He was saying, "Do you have interest in this? I want to make you aware of this opportunity for you." So then he was telling me all about the rules, and this is not how we do things, and he knows better, and you should know better, and you need to learn how to do it here. And then he went and had a conversation with the guy the next morning when dropping me off at the point to get the chauffeur out to the location, which was outside the city. And he did it in English, and he did it with me present, but it was still so embarrassing. Like, why do I need to be told how to act? I know what my intentions are. I know that nothing wrong is going on. Um, and it was, yeah, but it wasn't the hill I was going to die on. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to reiterate for people who haven't, who didn't catch it the first time, that experience with her ex, as Rachel said, didn't change her view of Islam. Like it didn't
No.
taint Islam for her. It was just he was imperfect, not Islam is causing this, right?
Yeah.
And you mentioned there's so much I want to talk about Ghira. You talked about Ghira, that concept of protective jealousy. It is
Mhm.
praised. I've also come across this
I
in my
know.
research for
Yeah.
the Prophet Ibrahim story. Like I
Yeah.
come across so many things just
Yeah.
randomly.
The
And
girl who said about the domineering, that's what it made me think of. That a lot of
yeah,
women look for this in Islam, especially ones who have been brought up in the religion, especially ones who've been brought up in certain regions. It's something they want, and
mhm.
it blows my mind.
and I feel like it's there in many ways. Many are conditioned to want that because they grew up
Hmm.
seeing. Like if you're a child and you're told this is a good thing, and the character in the movie is like this, and it's like the
Yeah.
girl is fawning over him, it
Yeah.
just becomes natural. But
Hmm.
anyway, the point I was going to here is women are like they're kind of I see it in so many Islamic stories and narratives. So the woman having ghira, like when the prophet's wives would be jealous of each other,
Hmm.
and it would be seen as like, women be women, like Allah created them that way. It's a flaw. Like
Uh-huh.
it's okay to be jealous, but like you gotta control yourself, girl. Like
Hmm.
it's that's the vibe. The man, it's actually a good thing, and he needs to do something about it. Maybe not as as outwardly as your ex or something, but he is in charge, and this is actually a virtue. If he doesn't have that, then he's there's a word for it, like
The youth,
the youth. Yes, I was
because I
thinking
was
of the
told not to
English
make
word.
him one several times. Yep.
See, the English word, I didn't want to say it on
Like a
screen.
cuckold, kind
A
of.
cuckold, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's they even say that to us, anyone who's a bit more lenient about like women's rights and whatnot.
Yep.
um so there's this demonization of not having this kind of toxic jealousy, and on the other hand, when women have it, they're seen as it's a flaw, it's just how women are, but that's how men are, right? It's and I see this constantly, that theme where the prophet's wives are arguing, and the prophet isn't, like, it's seen as a virtue that the prophet didn't shout at them and be like, stop bickering. He was more like, I understand this is a flaw of yours, I'm going to be accommodating to your flaw. You know what I mean? And
Hmm.
that really irked me, especially that women in heaven, for example, God's going to remove that flaw of jealousy so her husband can have more women. That
Why
changes
does she
who
have
the
a flaw if she's born perfect? Tell me that.
that's not the same person anymore, right? That's
Hmm.
anyway, that's part of who you are. And the way that the women had it, like the wives prophets, it wasn't even that toxic jealousy. It was justified. Hey, how come you only sleep with me one night a week? Like that's
Hmm.
uh, can you imagine being in that position? And they seem to balance it out, like the apologists balance it out with, well, he was the best man in the universe, so like one day a week is already great, and I'm not talking about in a literal, what they do sense, but
Yeah, yeah.
having the opportunity to have that at all. So yeah.
I guess what it made me think of when you were saying it is the same type of mentality, but in the opposite way, which is where men are often excused from inappropriate behavior like catcalling or street harassing or showing their knees, while women are persecuted for not covering to a man's level of comfortability. There's two parts. I'm talking about like hijab. It's for both genders. The rules are a bit different, but there are things that are the same, like, avert your gaze. So, if a woman's dressed inappropriately, rather than focusing on it and detailing all of her flaws, why not just not look? Because that's your responsibility too. And again, it's, oh, boys will be boys. They're gonna look. So control yourself. You have a brain. You're not
Yeah.
an animal. I mean, we are, biologically speaking. We're all animals, but um, you
Mm.
know, intelligence-wise, you can do this. So take some responsibility.
The Muslim in me is already expecting someone to say, but that's culture, not religion. And I don't think you're specifically saying that's Islam mandates that you do this, this, and that. You were actually saying the hijab is for both, and according to
Hmm.
Islam, you're supposed to lower your gaze.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm calling out the hypocrisy of only enforcing or focusing on one of the
mm.
conditions.
I would go even further, but I don't really need to like assert it hard here. But I would go even further and say Islam primes them for that imbalance. Like even though on paper, for example, you're supposed to look away, it
Hmm.
primes the culture that excuses that kind of thing. But
Interesting. Okay.
that's yeah, that's a whole nother thing. I
Yeah.
want to get back to there's two super chats that I haven't gotten to. So guys,
Okay.
thank you for the support again. But sometimes I can't interrupt the conversation right away. The verses. Did you pull up the verses?
Yeah, yeah, I have
Yet?
them here. I have two translations ready to go. All right, let's see.
Okay.
This is
So I'm gonna pull them up on screen as well for
okay.
people to see. Let me see if I can make it even more legible. I think this is fine. So
You wanna impress us with your reading skills there? Go on, do the Arabic.
so I'm starting a couple of verses earlier because I just thought this was kind of funny. So this one's talking about وَنَسُوقُ الْمُجْرِمِينَ إِلَى جَهَنَّمَ what is it? Wirdan. So it's saying we drive the wicked to hell, the criminals. And then it says they don't have the right to intercede and so on. So it's talking about torture. And then they said God had a son. So you see how it went from criminals to Christians?
Hmm.
Like you see how the sleight of hand here, there's always they're conflating disbelievers, and I guess Christians and Jews are kind of disbelievers in some parts of the Quran. Sometimes they're not, or even polytheists. They're
Hmm.
conflating a lot of these groups with criminals and people who do bad things. You see it in
Oh,
many verses. God is like saying, or the author is saying, don't steal, don't be bad to orphans. And then they're talking about disbelievers in the same breath.
yeah.
So it just
Like
implies
guilt
that
by
they're all lumped.
association.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and it's not a surprise when Muslims, then a lot of Muslims see those other as closer to that kind of criminality, because they
Hmm.
see that they don't have a rule that tells them don't do this, even though they might have that rule in their religion or their innate morality or their laws or whatever shared social norms, whatever you might want to call it. Just the
Yeah.
fact that Islam like phrases it that way just rubbed me the wrong way.
I'll
Um,
also point out that in one of the two translations I'm looking at right now, every single sentence there is marked with an exclamation point.
really,
Yep,
that's interesting. Yeah.
it
See,
is.
that doesn't come through in all translations, and they don't get the tone, except from if you're reading it in Arabic. Even if you're reading it in Arabic, you may not understand the underlying tone that was there. Um,
Hmm.
so I feel like written communication is not the best way to tell someone something. So
Hmm.
yeah. Um, so the verses that the person was pointing out, so I can read it in Arabic, but people will get bored. وَقَالُوا اتَّخَذَ الرَّحْمَنُ وَلَدًا. They said God has a son, and you have certainly made an outrageous claim. God is saying, the heavens are about to burst, the earth is about to split apart, and the mountains to crumble to pieces. Um, in protest of attributing children to the most compassionate to God. Um, it is not befit God to have children. I don't know, like the compassionate part has nothing to do with the context here, but it's just one of his names.
Well, yeah, one of the names.
Um, yeah, there is none in the heavens or the earth who will not return to the most compassionate in submission. So he knows them and has counted them precisely, and each of them will turn to him the day of judgment. And then now it's talking about the believers and who did good deeds. See the association. So disbelievers in bad things and believers in good things.
Hmm.
So what do you think about that section about? I think they were asking about the sky bursting or the heavens bursting and so on.
I mean, I doubt it's meant to be taken literally. I think it's figurative to begin with. I think they're just saying that this is such a big deal that this is what would happen because it's so inconceivable to us. Um, but it's basically it's I don't know in the order of revelation where this falls in comparison
Mhm.
to Ikhlas, but that's basically it's a repetition of that, isn't it?
The what? Ikhlas?
Yeah.
As in, what do you mean by that word exactly?
Qul huwa Allahu ahad, Allahu as-samad,
Okay,
lam
okay.
yalid. Yeah.
So you're saying, oh, well, like where it stands in the Quran, you mean?
Yeah, so I don't know because it's been mixed up.
Yeah.
It's not chronological. Even inside the surahs themselves, it's not
Mhm,
chronological, and so I don't know in order of revelation where this falls in comparison to that.
mhm.
But it seems like a more detailed account of that other surah to me.
Okay. Um, okay, I see your point here. You're saying Surah Al-Ikhlas is just about one God, and this is just
Yeah,
reiterating that and with
yeah,
more details, kind of.
yeah.
Um, I don't
But
know if it's
obviously,
more.
it's an important point if it's mentioned more than once. Because the
Yeah.
first time I read the Quran in translation, I was surprised at the amount of repetition. I was like, I get it. Like you said, this is bad. I know. But obviously, it's something that a lot of people were asking about because, as the story goes, some of the Quran was revealed for its own benefit, and some was revealed in response to questions that people in that time and place were asking
Mhm.
about events or other stuff.
It's funny when you said when you were first reading the Quran and you
Mhm.
thought, "I get it," it's kind of repetitive, boring, whatever. I know you
Mhm.
weren't thinking this in an insulting way to God, but if I had that thought, and I did, I once I started having these questions or thoughts or whatever they
Mhm.
were before doubts, I would feel guilty about it. It is a thought
Oh, really?
crime. Yeah,
Interesting.
because you can't think that you're better than God or that God's creation or his book isn't perfect. So if you have such a like that's such a blasphemous thought. And
It's interesting. I don't
yeah,
see it that way. I see it as it's written for the lowest common denominator, and maybe not everyone understood that particular part as readily as I did. And so I shouldn't, necessarily say this is not necessary. It's not necessary for me. But maybe plenty of other people do need the repetition of certain things to
yeah,
remember them.
yeah, very interesting. Because in my mind, like I said, just having the mere thought of why is this so repetitive? Even if I
Mhm.
got to the conclusion that you did, which is, oh, it must have been useful for other people, or
Mhm.
because he was saying it in context, like it wasn't all written down. Um, but just the mere thought of having that question where I was like, this kind of isn't perfect in a sense, because that's what I'm implying. If it's boring or repetitive, or
Mhm.
um, if it could be more concise and more clear, then yeah, that was a blasphemous thought. Um,
Mhm.
so
It's
yeah,
interesting you said thought crime too, because of course that makes me think about like 1984.
yeah, yeah. And
Hmm.
not to quote that movie too much, because then, or that book, because then you sound like one of those people who's like pseudo smart, who's like
What do you mean?
everything's 1984.
Oh,
There's a
please.
certain,
Okay, fine. We'll go to Minority Report instead. How about that? Get a little Tom Cruise.
yeah.
Oh, let's bring Scientology. Yes.
Oh God, that requires a whole other stream.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I'm actually curious. Like, I would actually want to go through that experience of Scientology, but I'm worried about. Obviously, they're gonna have my contact details, and like I don't want anything to do with that. But
Yeah.
I do want to witness it. Not because I think
Set somebody
it's
up with a hidden camera then.
sure. I'm sure other people have, and then their lives have been hell since. So, nah,
True. Okay,
I'm not
never
messing
mind.
with that.
Yeah, no.
um, so yeah, the person asking the question, to get back to it. Uh,
Hmm.
yeah, so I think they were trying to get your thoughts on what do you feel about how do you feel about that dramatization, or it's not literal, obviously, like
Yeah.
the sky has not split, but uh,
Although there's people who believe the moon's splitting.
there's that. And
So
hey,
maybe it is literal.
there's a hole in the ozone that was there, right? So I don't know if it has sealed up yet, but that means the sky did split. So that's God's prophecy, or the prophet's prophecy right here. That's because Christians exist. See, that's one like way you can actually justify this verse by
Hmm.
saying, people still worship Christ, and that's why there's a hole in the ozone layer. So um, I'll give my thoughts on it. Maybe that's what they're trying to get out of us, which is, yeah, why is it so dramatic? Like, what are the heavens actually reacting to anything? There was always this kind of the use of the language for those people to understand the magnitude of things. There was always some
Yeah.
kind of dramatic exaggeration, and that brings me to think this book isn't for me, because if God was speaking in this way to us today, or if a prophet would be like, dude, just you're a crazy guy. Like, it's who are you talking to? That's not how we talk. That's not how we think. And it doesn't make me feel any sort of way, especially if I'm coming at it from the angle of a non-Muslim. Would reading a verse like this make you feel emotionally like, oh wow, it's such a big deal? Like, it's a terrifying thought that the sky would split. Did it affect you that way?
No, it didn't. I just took it again as uh, an illustration.
Hmm.
Getting artistic, getting creative, meant to really reinforce that this is not the right way to conceptualize of the divine. And especially when we look chronologically, Judaism was first, then Christianity, then Islam. So, whenever someone's trying to market a product, you have to show why it's better than the old product. And so, here, this old one's faulty, like the airbags don't work. So watch out.
You know, that's very interesting that you're looking at it as like, I understand the use of that language. It hasn't, like, I don't doesn't do much to me, but I understand it.
Mhm.
And in my mind, I'm thinking more along the lines of, or I was thinking more along the lines of, this language isn't touching me in any way. Like, maybe at the time this was convincing some people because of the imagery in their mind. Maybe that was actually a fear of theirs, that one day the sky is going to be split or fall, or a lot of this imagery that they used to. Maybe that did affect those people because that's how they thought and spoke, right?
Mhm.
So if that was part of God's argumentation, or persuasion tactics, or the author, or whoever you want to call it, those persuasion tactics don't work today. I mean, in
For
your
some people, they
case,
probably do.
for some people, I don't know, it
They
didn't really
definitely
work to
do.
persuade you, right?
No, but for others, it would.
No.
Or it would perhaps reinforce what they already believe, would be a more accurate way to say it.
I mean,
I think if people have already bought into some of the similar language or cautions or um, views, then this may speak to them and they may legitimately think this is something that could happen. To me, it's similar to the rapture. You know,
mm,
that's something that I don't think will ever occur. But
isn't that like the Day of Judgment?
I'm talking about the exact term and the way there's like a book series about it. I can't remember what it was called. My eighth grade soccer coach tried to get me to read it, and I was like, this is inappropriate. But it's about like when the what is it? The true believers get called up and their clothes are left behind. And this book series was about what happens to those who are left behind. But I don't remember what the difference was. There was some difference that I found.
There
Anyway,
were more like monsters and stuff like that, right?
I don't remember. It was
Yeah.
a long time ago. But I will say this about colorful language. I also think the same thing applies to, characters of long bygone eras, like Methuselah, very famously was however many years old. Some people literally take this and say this is how long the man lived, but I think it's a way to show his wisdom because as you get older, you accrue more wisdom, you've had more time. So I think they're speaking not to his chronological age, but to his level of wisdom and influence and the trust that people had for making decisions for any of these people who were meant to have been hundreds or thousands of years old.
I had never thought of that it's linked to their wisdom, and the point is that they're very wise because they've been around for a while.
Yeah.
So did you
And
think that about
probably
the
longer than
prophets?
anyone else in the community, and therefore
Mhm.
nobody can date their age either.
Right. Well,
So it
that could be
turns
one.
into some sort of Paul Bunyan level of lore.
Okay. Well, did you think that about the prophets who lived a long time, like Noah?
Yeah,
So you
I
never
think that's
interpret it
all
literally.
analogy. No.
Huh. Interesting. Okay. It's interesting to me because when I see someone, for example, a Muslim asserting, "Oh, it was always meant to be metaphorical," right? And for
Hmm.
the reasons you're describing, or some kind of use of the language, I would think, what about the 1,000 plus years where the majority actually took it literally? Like, do
Hmm.
they? How is God going to assess us both when they believed something, not necessarily because they're gullible, but based on their worldview, it was possible, right?
Hmm.
Based on their, in a sense, it was gullibility out of ignorance, not willing ignorance, or, it's not a fault of theirs per se. How would they be assessed the same about their faith? So if my faith involves me believing that it was literal in today's day and age, and that makes me not believe in Islam. Is that really my fault? You know,
I
mhm,
think this is similar to how we concluded the last live stream, which is where you asked if there's a disbeliever, can they still have a chance at heaven? And my answer was absolutely yes, because intention counts for a lot. If God is indeed all knowing, then he knows that things are circumstantial. If somebody has not had an opportunity to be exposed to information that would cause them to believe or think differently, that can't be their fault. If somebody has reached a point where they are convinced of a truth, like if I am convinced that, um, I don't know, that the bottle is real, but I still deny it and I say this is not a bottle, it's not real, that perhaps would be disbelief. But I don't think that situation really exists, honestly.
did you think that way before our last talk, or
Yes.
so it's something that crossed your mind?
Hmm. It was partly to do with other Muslims, not many, but some urging me to give dawah to my family so that they wouldn't end up in hell. And that was a concept I couldn't really deal with. And so I tried to think about it. There must be another answer. There must be another way because, you know, nobody's perfect, but I do still believe that everyone has innate goodness. And your intentions and actions add up to your, I don't know,
Hmm.
not your worth, but they add up to something.
It
And
is
how
your
could it be
worth, kind of,
possible?
like
Eh,
yeah,
it depends. Yeah.
your worth to God, or in the eyes of
Okay.
God.
Okay. Or to
Yeah.
humanity if you're not religious.
Nah, it
Um,
wouldn't be your worth to humanity because
no?
it adds to it. Because I would say, so religious actions, like good deeds, aren't necessarily good for humanity. Some of them are just arbitrarily because God said so. So it increase your worth in the eyes of God, but good deeds in terms of good for humanity do increase
Mhm.
your worth in the eyes of God, but not as much, or not
Okay.
on their own, right?
Well, I guess again, in that case, it's going to be circumstantial, your frame of reference and the things you think are
Yeah,
good, and if you do them.
yeah. It's very obvious to me now that coming from a position of indoctrination and being in the religion for a while, it's harder to adopt a progressive stance, or not adopt a progressive stance, but convince myself or be convinced that the progressive stance or the reinterpretation is actually possibly from God or likely from God. But it
Mhm.
seems to be easier when you start with a blank slate, right? When you're starting from not a position of traditional Islam.
Yeah.
So that's very interesting. And that's why we see a lot of converts. Well, a lot of them are very extreme, but more of them are just very progressive and
Hmm.
more spiritual in a sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I still have one super chat that I haven't read yet. Thanks again, Aladdin. I'm the atheist son of a
Oh,
Muslim Kurdish tribe leader, and I got a lot of inside stories I wanted to share. That's why I contacted you on Twitter. Contacted you on Twitter. If you want, I can message elsewhere. Yes, please. I'll seek out your message. I'll email you back. I know there's a lot of people saying that that they want to have a conversation with me or something. I'm sorry, I just can't get to them all, and sometimes I don't want to sift through my inboxes because they're either too many too many bad stories that I really it just keeps chipping away at me, and I don't blame you for wanting to share them. And sometimes I will be able to share something back or advertise a story, but sometimes it's a lot of hate that I'm getting in the comments and or in the DMs, and sometimes I also don't like I don't know how I feel about. There's a lot of people have been sending me. I'm sorry, I'm going on a tangent, but a lot
that's
of people
fine.
have been sending me messages saying like, thank you for this or for that, or I've heard some interesting stories like I used to hate you and now I don't anymore, or either and I've left Islam or I haven't, but and I don't get to have a conversation like this with them. And if you did send me something like anything, sometimes I do read them. I just can't can't give you a proper response, so I just can't open it and get into it. But thank you for those who do send me anything, be it like obviously not the hate, but something, if you have a question or words of encouragement or something. But unfortunately, I just can't get to them all. They're still appreciated though. But yeah, I try to find interesting stories and perspectives here and there. So, but it's happening slowly for me though, because it was easy to schedule something with Rachel. We both quickly got a time in mind, and I kind of made space for this because it's kind of continuation of the conversation that we had before. Um, but yeah, I've got like a stream every other week or something planned for a while, so we'll see what happens. Yeah,
Trying
so
to be covert here. Hold on one sec.
yeah. Oh, one more. I got paid recently, so I'm jumping on the super chat bandwagon. This is for the cat. Well, thank you. And the cat says thank you. He'll get one extra can of food today, I suppose. Um, let's see. Yeah. And let me just scroll through the comments once more because I have not been paying attention. I do need a moderator. Okay. So I think that's all the comments that stood out to me.
Okay.
Did you have something in mind? I still had a question or two, but
Go
do you
ahead.
have anything anything that you want to say before I keep going? Or
Um, I don't know. I have a couple of questions for you at the end, but I think we've covered everything else I wanted to.
okay,
Um, yeah, I think everything else we've got to that I had in my mind.
okay. Well, the last two questions I have for you are kind of
Mhm.
about me, so sorry about
Okay.
that in advance. Um, First of all, have you seen my I don't fault you if you don't, but have you seen my videos, not just my live streams? Have you seen some of them?
Um, Let me think. I know of them. I don't know that I've actually clicked into any of them yet.
Okay.
Because a lot of times when I'm in the mood for content, I don't have as much time available as the length of the video. And if I
Mhm.
come and go, then I won't retain it.
Okay. That is something that a lot of people have said, like they favor like 10-minute videos. So I'll try, but my trains of thought are pretty long. So
Yeah.
um, the reason I ask that is because so sometimes Muslims would have a favorable opinion of me based on the conversations that I'm having, or at
Hmm.
least like a neutral position. Uh, but sometimes they haven't seen my videos, but sometimes it's in spite of having seen my videos. And the reason I mentioned that is I'm making more jokes in my videos. I'm more sarcastic. I will
Yeah.
say stuff that's more, more disrespectful to Islam, so to speak, because
Hmm.
I don't believe in respecting people's beliefs like blindly. And
Hmm.
when I'm talking about Islam, it's not to offend Muslims, but that tends to happen. But the tone of the conversation is different because I'm addressing a toxic idea, for example. There's no need to walk on eggshells around that idea. But when I'm
Hmm.
talking to an actual human, I'm trying to get their perspective, not grill them about the book, right?
Right.
So the reason I asked is I wanted to know if you're one of those people who still thinks like I'm civil despite having seen my videos, or you haven't, uh, or in spite of my videos.
I'm gonna just write down a little place in my thing here for like follow up, and I'll get back to you.
Okay. And yeah, and the other question I had is, was there a particular issue or did your way of thinking or your questions change since the last conversation we had, or was there a particular strategy or way of thinking or a specific issue that you've been thinking about since?
Um, I guess the initial anxiety and trying to figure out how to deal with stuff um, was pretty much the focus for the immediate time right after I came to this conclusion. And like I said, it was a decision I felt I had to make, not one I wanted to make, because it's a big change and change is hard, but it also promotes growth. So I don't know, like what kind of examples are you thinking of? Because I'm really not sure how to answer.
No, I don't have anything in mind. I'm just thinking, was there a takeaway from that conversation? Like, how did it affect you? Like, what was, yeah, what was the effect it had on you?
I think it was good to see from the live stream, there was good to see that there's somebody with this approach, because I was kind of getting to a place where I thought there was only like two sides and no middle ground.
Militant, militant,
Yes,
as you put it.
yes, yes. So it was nice to find that. And then in our offline conversation, when you brought up this, how perfect is the message and therefore the writer, it opened my mind, but in a way, it also gave me permission to address things that I'd been ignoring in a somewhat deliberate way. That I guess because I knew they were going to be problematic, and that it was a lot that I was going to have to consider and some serious soul searching. So yeah, it was partly just kind of like a, a moment of clarity, but also permission to to come to different conclusions that needed to be reached.
That's that's really interesting that you said. So you said sort of willingly put aside, right? Because you knew they're going to be problematic, and
Mhm.
I understand that. I've done that too. And do you think? And I think a lot of believers do that. Do you think that push that you got from the conversation, I suppose, was that inevitable? Like, would you have gotten to that point on your own? Because it seemed like you were already thinking a lot about these
Yeah,
issues.
I mean, I can't say definitively, but I think yes, there were a number of things that had been increasingly frustrating, especially over the few weeks immediately prior. And I think at one point or another, it probably would have happened, but perhaps in a different way or for a different reason. And the thing I'm thankful for is that the way it actually went down was it was the right thing at the right place at the right time. So it was, even though it was, scary and overwhelming, it was still safe. Um, and it was easier to accept in that way.
Well, I don't have much to say about that. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, sure.
I just really wanted to know, like how you perceive the conversation. You've already spoken about it,
Hmm.
but I wanted to know what effect has our talk had. Especially that now that I know you haven't really watched my videos, so it
Hmm.
wasn't that you saw some kind of point that I was making in a video and some kind of deep criticism of some verse.
Hmm.
That wasn't really anything that pushed you towards this direction or towards continuing or exploring or feeling safe and having
No,
that
just
questioning.
your approach.
Okay.
Like I said, the way you're not pushing anybody, and that honestly, correct me if I'm wrong, but I doubt you would have said any of the things you did offline unless I had asked. That was my impression. Is that correct?
Things such as, oh, that like when we talked offline. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
because for those who, I mean, nobody would know. I had kind of said, I'm in a process of trying to find some answers, and what kind of sources should I be looking at to look at the other side, because I'm well aware of confirmation bias, and my Googling isn't working. I'm not finding what I know is there. And you said, it's not about disproving, but it's about looking for other proof and about the message. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Ed, you were saying, would I have told you these things? No, I wouldn't have. I don't know if I would have reached out to you at all
Hmm.
because I didn't want to feel like I always have this attitude, even in my personal life. I don't want to put pressure on someone,
Hmm.
even though it's not that much of a pressure to just correspond with a person you spoke to earlier. But I didn't want it to seem like I didn't want to invite you on the show again myself because I didn't want it to seem like I'm trying to get content out of it or
Yeah.
trying to use your situation or your even like use your mind, for my
Hmm.
benefit. So when
Hmm.
you reached out to me, I was actually very happy about that. I was surprised, honestly. I don't know. I feel like it's not that surprising, but it was
Hmm.
still pleasant. And we did talk about, like I even said in the beginning, I was hesitant to give you some answers about some of the things that you were
Hmm.
asking me about, or you're trying to tell me, like, I may have mentioned like one of the things that I had contention with, and I told you beforehand it's kind of ugly, and I don't want to throw that on you. But since the conversation started, on your end, and you asked for that, then yeah, we did have that conversation. So we wouldn't have had that no if you hadn't reached out. So thanks for reaching out.
Yeah, and I think the fact that you felt and restrained yourself based on this hesitation shows responsibility,
Thank
discernment,
you.
consideration, and empathy. So thanks. That's part of why it became a safe place to have this kind of discussion.
Well, thank you. And this there's a little bit of a imposter syndrome where I'm already anticipating Muslims saying, "But that's not how you act in your videos." And the thing is, though, my videos are not. I'm not shoving them down Muslims' throats. Like I'm not even. It's very easy to just press, ignore this content creator or block or whatever.
Yeah.
And but this seems like it's a default position for Muslims that if you're just talking about Islam, you're asking us for our attention and you're trying to make this about us when it not necessarily like it's not really about them. So when I make videos, it's not, hey Muslims, come here, like and what about this? But when I am talking to someone, bringing up these things is kind of more, shoving it in their faces. So that is why the approach is a little different. But it's not that I'm changing my position on anything. It's just I have more freedom to talk about the issue at its core
Hmm.
without a person present that I'm trying to hold accountable for something that's in a book that they may not necessarily believe that part. So
Yep.
yeah, so I just wanted to clarify that.
Hmm.
And yeah, and you had questions for me.
Yes.
So
Have we
I
reached
would
that
love to
point?
hear them. Yeah, we've reached that point
At
at
the
this point.
moment, there are five, but we'll see what happens.
Okay.
And let me know based on the question, at what point you'll have kind of a lengthy answer, because I do need to take a quick break to attend to a personal issue.
Okay.
And so I'll just mute and go take care of that and come right back. But I'll still be able to hear you while I'm out off. But the first one, what's your vision for this channel?
Ooh. Um, so in the beginning, especially,
Wait,
I don't
is this
have
going to be a long enough answer? Can I dip?
no. Okay. Yeah. Well, sure. No, no. I'll try to make it quick. It's
Okay.
it it's I never really had some kind of concrete vision for it,
Hmm.
especially in the beginning. In the beginning, I just made a TikTok or two to talk about the
Hmm.
story of Prophet Ibrahim and killing his own son, or God telling him to kill his son, because it
Hmm.
just struck me as odd that that kind of behavior we wouldn't excuse except for allegedly this man's dream is a revelation from God. But any
Hmm.
other man having a dream about, chopping off his son, even though it didn't happen, but the mere idea that we're normalizing, it's you listen to anything God says, but which God, and you can feed a lot of bad beliefs that way. So I was just talking about that. And in my head, I was just thinking, I need to bring attention to just one thing or another. And it started into, okay, well, now I need to humanize ex Muslims, and now I need to reassure them as well. And now I need to talk about the things that affect Muslims and ex Muslims, whether they leave or stay in Islam. So
Hmm.
in a way, it's kind of supportive. I hope. Um, in a way, it's also to air out my thoughts because we didn't have a chance as ex-Muslims or people who are critics of Islam to do this for years and years historically. And yeah, that there's I don't have a vision for the future. I just hope it doesn't turn into something I don't want, in a sense.
Yep,
Yeah.
I know exactly what you mean. And I would say, in pursuit of that, I think it's admirable that you're trying to accommodate all these different people and not appeal to them necessarily, because that sounds like you're trying to get people to come on, and I
No,
don't get
not
that sense.
appeasing or appealing.
Yeah,
Like
no,
I
I
want to make
think
that clear.
just making it accessible. We'll put it that way, making it accessible to lots of different people. But in order to not get burnt out, essentially, make sure that it's still accessible to you.
Yeah. And at the core of it, I want people to know this isn't some kind of dawah channel or anti-dawah
Yeah.
channel.
Hmm.
At the end of the day, if Muslims don't want to listen to me, it is what it is. I'm still gaining a lot of benefit, not from it's not like riling up ex-Muslims against Islam or Muslims. It's more like, hey, like we want to talk about this, and this is for us to talk about. If you want to listen, as you've seen, you want to contribute or listen, you're welcome to. If you don't, you're not the target audience only.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and just the last point is, yeah, I don't want it to become something that I don't want. So
Hmm.
that's why I'm trying to be careful about my language, just so it's not misinterpreted. When I see people using certain language, I tell them off.
Hmm.
I don't want blind support. I don't want huge numbers if they're not good numbers, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
And I don't want this to be just very taxing on me. Like I don't see this becoming some kind of over. I don't think so. At least not in this format. I see myself walking away from this at some point, and I hope that I feel fulfilled at that point. That I've done a good job, and I'm
Hmm.
happy with where I'm leaving it here. So
Yeah.
yeah,
So far,
yeah,
so good. Um, Next up, what is your message to new viewers from all backgrounds as well as for subscribers? And I feel like you kind of started to
yeah.
touch on this in the
You
last
can
thing.
you can go ahead and take care of your personal
Okay, my
thing.
personal issue. I'll be right back. Just let me check.
Okay.
Can you still hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Oh, all right. Hold on. Then how?
I can't now. Yeah, good. All right, I can just remove you from stream for now. So she's going to be back, and I might even put a timestamp on that. So if you want to skip ahead, but what was her question again? She was asking me, yeah, what do I want to tell to new viewers or people who aren't like who are new to the channel? I do need to make a new introduction for my channel where I used to have one. It's kind of like a channel trailer where I tell people, hey, this is my name is so and so. Obviously, I say it in every video, and this is what I'm doing. This is the purpose of it, and this is what I want you to know. So I'll make a longer version of that, more well put together. Um, so if you're new here, the first impression you might have is this is an anti-Islam channel, and I don't know if I'd phrase it that way exactly. I'm anti a lot of things in Islam, and I explain why, and I talk about my position on it and the position of so many people who don't have the luxury of saying that out loud. And just to let them know that it's okay to think that you're not crazy as your community is telling you, as your own religion is telling you, because a lot of it is also self-inflicted. The doubt that am I going insane by not believing? Am I a bad person? Is what they're saying true? This is a lot of it is just reassurance for those people, and they can see that I've thought these things through, and I'm getting other people to give their input as well. And it's not just simply we hate Islam, we hate Muslims, and this and that. This is definitely not an anti-Muslim channel, but if you do see me say statements that sound problematic to you, try to at least see where I'm coming from. So if I say something like most Muslims are homophobes, that is a fact, an unfortunate fact. And most Muslims don't mind that label, but then other people, be it Muslims or non-Muslims, would take offense to it. Like either, how dare you? Not all of them, or that's just personal preference. You can't, pin it on me as a negative thing. So I'm sorry, but it is what it is. And but try to at least get where I'm coming from. And one more thing that I had in mind, yeah, if you wanna give my channel a chance, then try to focus on what I'm saying. None of it is an argument to prove or disprove Islam because it's never been proven. So that's why you'll see me not often entertain, people trying to have a back and forth about prove this or disprove that. I don't do debates that way. But it doesn't mean that I'm just talking baselessly, but sometimes I would have opinions and I would say this is not from any kind of, Islamic interpretation or anything. I'm just saying it seems awfully suspicious that so and so, and that's meant to be taken that way. It's just commentary. And that's to normalize the idea that Islam and other religions are things that can be commented on, not just academically taken apart and debated and argued about. We get to talk about it like a movie, like a book, like anything else. And hopefully with time, that'll be more normal. Anyway, there's probably more to the answer, but Rachel is back. So let's bring Rachel back. Hey.
Back and better than ever. Hey, you can hear me?
Yes, yes, I
All
can.
right, cool. Did you see what I wrote in the chat too?
Ready? Yeah.
No, before
The
that,
the
the other thing.
oh no, I don't think so. Yes, yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
I was planning on that.
Um, okay, great. So, all right, you ready for the next one?
Yes. Born ready.
So feel free to not answer this if it would put you in a compromising position. But how do you approach protecting your identity when you're out in public? Because I'm sure there's other people who may have these
Mhm.
concerns. As somebody who has this channel, discussing or choosing not to discuss certain topics, are there people in your private life who know about your alter ego? Like, how much overlap is there? Because this must be really tough.
So I can't get into details because that would
Hmm.
kind of expose the strategies I'm using, and then,
Okay.
people would come up with the opposing strategies to
Yeah.
discover it. All I'm gonna say is try to think of every little detail. Unfortunately, it gives you this kind of paranoia, and it gives me unease when I see someone, like, looking at me for a little too long. I'm like, I wonder. Um,
Um,
it is for people who do want to do this, and I get this question often. I would say I'm not gonna tell you to do it or not to do it, just weigh the risks very well. In some people's lives, if they get exposed or outed or whatever or doxed, it may not be the end of the world for them. They would just cut off a few people, and they're not gonna get in any sort of legal or societal trouble. But for some people, it might be a matter of life and death. For some people, it might be a matter of protecting those around them. I can't speak too much about my situation. I take a lot of precautions, and yeah, and I try to. I had this idea in the beginning, and maybe turns out I am wrong. I remember telling another ex-Muslim content creator, Infidel Noodle. I remember telling her, "No, no, my approach is like it's not hostile, it's not hateful. I don't think like I still got to cover my face just just to be safe, but I don't think people would target me that way." And I was so wrong. Like without even saying the word Muslims. Like in the beginning, I was just talking about Prophet Ibrahim or this and that. I was met with so much hostility and threats. Most of them are empty, like most of them can't actually find me. But one of those people might. Like there have been attempts, people trying to guess my location or find this, detail or that detail, and um, you can't be too careful is what I'm
mhm,
gonna say. And you have to accept that there's a risk that it'll happen eventually, and you're just gonna have to deal with the backlash. It's kind of a sacrifice, and is it worth it or not? It depends on your life, and you may even regret it afterwards and say, "Yeah, that was not worth it." There are certain things that I would have done a little differently, not about my approach, but about how I'm hiding my identity. I'm not gonna
mhm.
talk about what, but it is what it
Yeah.
is at this point.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's all I have.
Okay. Um, so you may have already created content on this, I'm not sure, but does your family know that you've left Islam? I know you said they're well educated, not just about religion,
Mhm.
but in general. So if they know, what do they think about that?
Well, that brings me to your previous question. I forgot to answer the part about the overlap. So in
Oh yeah.
in my private life, I'm not known as an ex-Muslim. So my Muslim contacts, either they're kind of progressive or cultural Muslims or whatever it may be, and they know I'm not practicing, or
Hmm.
or I'm just like I'm not doing the things you guys are doing, and we just don't talk about it, and that's more than fine by me. I don't ever talk about religion, and or even out of even though do have curiosity about how people believe and think, and that's why I have this show. I wouldn't do that in my personal life because I just don't want that kind of tension, and I yeah, it's just not the place for it. So I'm
Sure.
I'm not even, curious enough to open these topics. There's
Yeah.
a lot of people who aren't Muslim at all, or are actually ex-Muslim, or have never actually cared about Islam, but they're born Muslim, and it's kind of an in-betweener. And some of them, my closest friends, they know. I have a couple of friends who know about this. A couple of them actually watch my content, and one of them is not Muslim at all, but he's just curious about all these topics.
Yeah.
And thankfully, like, none of them are the type who's supporting me for the wrong reasons, like, yeah, those dumb believers. No, it's not like that. uh, and so there is some overlap, but the majority is, I'm just like, outside of this, I'm just a person doing their thing. But yeah, I have to make sure that the wrong kind of people don't find out.
Yeah.
And in terms of family, so I don't comment on that much because, and I've said this before, say if my family was accepting, right? If the situation is they are accepting, people might my identity ever gets found out, they might be targets of harassment because they didn't shun me, they didn't report me, they didn't whatever it may be. And if they're not accepting, and my identity comes out, they might still be targets of harassment by the other kind of militants, though it's less likely. I still don't want that kind of shame put on them,
Right.
if they're that kind of parent. So yeah, some things I just keep ambiguous, which you already told me. Like if I can't answer it, it's fine.
Yeah, of course,
Uh,
of course.
Yeah,
Yeah, because I don't want to put you in a bad spot.
yeah.
Um, so the last one, so many converts are urged wrongly because there's very, very rarely a legitimate need to do this, to change their name when they come to Islam to something, a Muslim name or like an Arabic name. A lot of people told me to do that too, and there's so much evidence you don't have to. Like it says, let the orphans keep their names, etc. When women marry, they don't take their husband's last name. So for those who don't know, unless your name has some sort of negative meaning about you as a person or ascribing you to a different god, like, the worshiper, slave of the sun god or something, there's no need to change your name. But some people choose to, which is fine. But as somebody who I'm guessing was given a Muslim sounding name, and especially someone who's trying to protect his identity, did you ever consider changing it either as a nickname or legally when you left?
So, okay, I'm going to answer that in a bunch of different ways. I've
Okay.
seen ex-Muslims say they want to and they feel the need to, not because
Hmm.
Muslims are forcing them, they just want a new name.
Hmm.
And I understand that sometimes they might be pushed that way because they don't want the memory of it, right? Or a
Hmm.
constant reminder of it, especially if like your name is Abdullah or something, slave of
Yeah.
Allah.
Right. Right.
And you could be an Abdullah who doesn't want to change his name, like Abdullah Samir, and some Muslims use that against him, and they say, well, how about you change your name? And that brings me to the next point. You don't have to change your whole identity. Like it's a very personal thing. The
Hmm.
fact that someone would say your name and you would look like you just know that is your name.
Yeah.
Sometimes like your life wouldn't be affected that much by keeping it, and you don't want to go through the trouble of restructuring yourself. And sometimes it's symbolic, like like you were talking about the tattoos. Sometimes you do need that for a fresh start.
Yeah.
So it really depends. In my case, um, I have not. I
Okay.
don't like the fact that I'm presumed Muslim because of my name. And that
Right.
brings us to the point of like religious freedom. It's not really a thing back in Muslim countries. So if you have a
Hmm.
Muslim name, you're presumed Muslim unless something's wrong with you or you're one of those, or even, very mild objectors would just say, he's one of those poor, misled, whatever, whatever. I hope he comes back. May Allah guide you, which is pretty condescending, but it is what it is. And
Hmm.
oh, I could have done this the whole time. Oh well,
Oh.
a
Oh
little
well.
too late for that. um, I don't. What was I talking about? The name
Hmm.
and yeah, I don't want to change my name, and I want it to be normalized that someone with a Muslim name and Muslim look, whatever that means, or Middle
Yes.
Eastern or
Hmm.
Pakistani or whatever Southeast Asian, that they're not presumed to be Muslim. Obviously, if you
Sure.
have the specific kind of Muslim beard or you're wearing, I mean, even the beard is not necessarily Muslim, but the sort of unkept beard some people think is Sunnah, um, that sort of look, or if you have a hijab, obviously a woman in a hijab is Muslim, but even then, you shouldn't presume that she is a practicing Muslim. Maybe that's just unfortunately the position she's put in. She has to wear a hijab because of, hijab is not actually a free choice. It's kind of that's a whole other topic. So I want to get to a point where someone's appearance or name doesn't imply that they're Muslim. Just like someone could be called Christian or Joshua or Chris or something, and you don't presume that they're actually Christian. So I want to get to that point with Islam, with Muslims, so that people can keep their very religious names with absolutely no stigma, and so that they don't have to explain themselves every time they meet a Muslim who presumes they're Muslim, and then it's an awkward situation of, do I tell them, do I not? So yeah.
So there's just one thing I want to respond to, because you said that for women, those who wear hijab are obviously Muslim. It's not actually true.
Mhm.
There's a decent number of pagans who veil. They do it in a slightly different way usually, like fashion wise, but it's significant enough. There's also certain types of other religions who veil, like there's Jewish women of certain sects who wear a wig or a veil of some sort. Usually, I think it's called like a tishel. I'm probably not pronouncing it right. Um, but there's a lot of crossover in the fashion side of things between these groups. And
I
then there's
stand
actually,
corrected.
There's actually people on Reddit all the time on a particular sub dedicated to hijabis coming to ask, I'm not Muslim, I'm not of any religion that typically covers, but I like it and I want to do it not because I'm interested in the religion, but for other reasons. Sometimes it's like a medical thing. They don't want to show their hair or they have a skin condition, but a lot of times they just like it and they want to be a little more modest or just it fits their aesthetic even. And they're asking, is this allowed or would this be offensive? Is this appropriation? And all the time the answer is the same, which is that this doesn't belong to Islam. It is very common and it's a marker and you probably will be assumed to be Muslim. So you need to be okay with that, but it's not appropriation. The style of wearing it is cultural, but there's so much overlap. And at this point it's spread out that, you're good to go as long as you're not deliberately saying or doing something offensive while wearing it.
Yeah, makes sense. I wasn't aware about the pagans. I don't even think about pagans. I need to really like.
Whoa! You want to say that a different way?
I mean, it just doesn't cross my mind because as a Muslim, it was just in my head. Pagans, that was an old thing. It's gone. Islam replaced it. Done. That's it. I didn't even really realize till a couple of years ago that they still exist. So that's what I mean by I don't think about them. I am curious now.
I know.
Yeah. I am curious now, and I do want to read into it, but it's one of those things like in the back of my mind. Like the list is very long.
Yeah.
And I wasn't aware at all of absolutely like non-religious or non-Muslim, non-pagans wanting to wear it. So interesting. Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. No, that's it.
Those are all your questions for me?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I know we could take some more questions from the comments, but I think we've spoken for like 3.5 hours now at this point. I think we've covered most of our bases. Yeah. This is kind of bittersweet because I don't know if you would want to come back on the channel. Maybe.
Man, if we have something interesting to talk about, sure.
Exactly. If there is a topic, like I'm not gonna like you're always welcome, but obviously I'm not gonna invite you if we have nothing in mind.
I tell you what, here's what you're gonna do.
Sure.
Put a sticky in the comments. People can drop down what they want to have in a future discussion, and you can take the top few and make a poll, and then we'll go from there.
Okay. That's a good one. I'll try to remember to do that. Let me write it down.
Okay.
Sticky poll. Okay. What else was I thinking? Yeah. So if it does happen that we do want to have another conversation, actually consider this an open invitation to, I haven't done this show in a while, but, or this type of live stream is called Shisha with Aladdin, with Aladdin, where I invite someone. So far it's been ex-Muslims, but that's not the intention. I had other guests scheduled, but where we just talk about anything. It's not necessarily about, let's talk about Islam. It's more to prove that we have a lot in common with a lot of people who are Muslim or Christian and so on. And it's just a reminder of that. So I don't know what the topics will be. Maybe we'll get a little bit more personal, talking about, our preferences, our interests and things like that. So yeah, you're welcome to come join me there. And if there's a more, involved live stream like this one about a topic like this, we can also do that as well.
Sounds good. I will tell you, in addition to religion and equal rights, my other pet project is mental health. So that's an interesting one.
Okay. Yeah, we could definitely talk about that. Yeah. So
cool. Well, thanks for having me on. It's been real. Yeah. It's been highly interesting.
I agree. Thank you for reaching out both times, like the first and the second time.
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of people appreciate it. And you know what's funny is I keep forgetting that in the beginning you said that you are leaving Islam. Like that has escaped my mind so many times, and I think a lot of people keep like presuming that you haven't in the comments. But that's to show that like I didn't enjoy this conversation because you left Islam. I enjoyed the first one and this one as well. So yeah, thanks for coming here. And thanks people for watching. And I think the comments were a bit more reserved this time. So I hope they did listen to what we said earlier.
Okay.
Yeah. And I don't really know how to wrap this up except for thanks everybody for watching. And thank you, Rachel. Think critically, everybody. Think for yourself. Bye-bye.